Welcome everyone to the January 2nd meeting of the Town of Richmond Selectboard. We are meeting on a Tuesday because New Year's Day fell on the 1st, and we agreed it would be for the best to push it out one day. Would anybody like to, yes. Would anybody like to make a public comment? Mary.
Yeah, you guys are still shocked that I finally made it to a meeting, but this is the first of 2024. Hello, Mary Hool reporting. And there's a gentleman who calls it the Mary Show. I just want to let him know we're on again. I noticed that there is an item that's going to be discussed tonight, but I'm going to hit and run because I've got something in the oven or dehydrator or something. This past event, this flooding event, was much more severe than the last ones in that the planters at the Volunteers Green, the ones that were not the round ones, I don't know what you call the shape, the squarish ones, those were met with significant resistance and all tipped over. And I had just barely got reimbursed for the soil that I put in there. I can replenish it again at only $10 rather than 40 for the new soil. I can recharge some soil. But if this doesn't state with the greatest emphasis why we need to preserve Brown's Court as a play area. When I was a kid growing up, this was the building we had for school. I went to this school we moved here in 59 from second grade to junior, and then Mount Mansfield for the senior year. That was our only place to recreate until Mount Mansfield was created. So taking consideration for what happened down here and the length of time it gets to recover each time, no aspersions on that, but Brown's Court has never had that. Once we lose, and yes, I will say we will lose Brown's Court, we will never get it back again for recreation. You really need to consider that when all this comes up before you. You can't go back in time to take that back once there's housing there. You will never have it again. And because of the way, maybe not me, but because of the way the town of Richmond has been treated as it relates to the money that was lent to the housing group that currently is in charge of the stuff down at the end of Railroad Street, I seriously doubt that they are capable of making decisions that will benefit the town. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment from anybody present on any item that's not currently on the agenda? Okay, Jeff?
I'd like to acknowledge that the sun came out today, which is something we haven't seen in quite some time, and I'm very thankful for that. My skin still hurts.
Yeah.
I would like to, as chair, welcome the first Vermont baby born in 2024. Each year, of course, it's a very competitive thing to see who can be the first child born in Vermont after midnight on the 1st. And we are pleased to recognize Wyatt Patrick Thomas Murray as not only the first Richmond baby born, but as the first child born in Vermont in 2024.
There you go.
So Wyatt, you're probably not listening, but
The leader.
and Wyatt's parents, congratulations. Okay, are there any additional items, additions, deletions, or modifications to tonight's agenda?
Nope. I don't. I would like.
Okay, Bard, go ahead.
Copy? Yeah.
I'm not sure if it fits tonight, Jay, but I see intermittently over the months on Front Porch Forum, people raising the question of, oh, there's this flooding damage and gravel has come down and landed on somebody's property. Somebody take care of that. And we might have sort of an overview at some point about how that works, who is and is not responsible for flood damage, including like new gravel bars, if you will, on people's fields. And publicize that a bit. I just raise it because it seems like it keeps coming up. I don't know if that makes sense to folks or not.
Josh, we'd like to comment.
Bud, you want to talk specifically about the land trust land and the Route 2 area?
That is the latest. It's not the first and might not be the last, but that is the most recent. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is something that we don't have prepared report on. the Richmond Land Trust did post to Front Porch Forum about the Route 2 situation out there toward the gateway. And it's, I think, now in the Richmond Land Trust hands, but we can certainly try to do a more in-depth discussion of that at the next meeting. If
Well,
that's-
I think the latest posting was not just the land trust property, but the farm field on the other side of Route 2, which has also been impacted. So there's sort of.
Okay. Well,
It's a
it's a
little
good
bit.
idea to do a little deeper dive and present at the next meeting. Thank you for bringing that up. Kara, you have your hand up.
I'd like to make a request to move H and I to the beginning of the meeting if it's at all possible. I'd like to not have to attend for everything else, so, and I'd appreciate that.
For various reasons, I would prefer we not move those all the way to the front. We have some things that we have other involved parties who are also here who would like to cross those off. But I will see if we can move them up if at all possible. Jeff.
Well, I'd also point out that one of the purposes of the agenda is to let people who are not here and online know approximately when we're going to be discussing certain issues. So, moving them around can be difficult for people who have expectations.
Right. And I do believe we have some people who are planning on attending based on the expectation of what time those are currently on the agenda. So
So
for
can I
right,
request in the future that any item that you know is going to get large attendance, like the Browns Court had a large attendance the last couple meetings, that you please move it to the beginning of the agenda, because we do have some people who are of a population who don't stay up till 9-10 o'clock at night, that find it very difficult to attend a later time in the evening. So if you wouldn't mind accommodating the majority versus one or two people.
well, Kara, speaking to that, that's the item is on the items related to Browns Court are on the agenda at that point for a very specific reason. We are aware that Browns Court and housing and recreation are topics of a great deal of interest. However, we tend to revisit the exact same comments every single time they come up. And consequently, we lose sizable portions of the meeting to hearing the exact same things. We need to take and prioritize things for which action is needed over things that are simply more let's discuss items. And at this point in time, the Browns Court items are merely let's discuss. They are not action items. And so consequently, the items on the agenda that require actual action will tend to be up front, leaving time later in the evening for anything that is more open-ended and could go anywhere. So with that in mind.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jay. I really appreciate that clarification. And I appreciate that. And it just seems like every meeting we're talking about the same things. I agree with you.
Yeah, Lisa.
Chairman, I'd like to point out too, that you were really good at putting items on the top of the agenda that may give answers to things later on the agenda. So.
Well, I tried, but
first step.
sometimes it doesn't work out that way, but we do.
Well,
try.
that's your intent.
Yeah.
I know. Good
Okay.
intentions, yeah.
Well, with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into the agenda. Some of the items at the beginning are hopefully going to be quite quick. The first item is essentially purely informational, but it's a quick update. It has to do with NARCAN, also known as naloxone. The opioid crisis is as bad here in Vermont as it is anywhere, and actually much worse here than it is in some places. And as David Sander can attest, it is not going away. He deals with it in his day-to-day work. The Richmond Rescue does, of course, have NARCAN available for treatment to people who are overdosing, but it is conceivable that under certain circumstances, Richmond Rescue personnel might be on calls and may not be available, and time is of the essence when an overdose is taking place. So the town staff, our town clerk, assistant town clerk, town finance director, town manager, and assistant to the town manager, as well as myself and a couple of others, got trained on how to administer NARCAN. But then the issue we had was that we had no NARCAN to administer. Vermont Cares down in Burlington was able to set us up with a batch of NARCAN, and I'd like to reference our memo briefly to give a little more detail. What we got was 25 bags, and each bag contains 2 NARCAN nasal sprays, 2 face masks, 6 moist towelettes, 9 fentanyl drug test strips, 9 xylazine test strips, and 1 device for use during mouth-to-mouth. Now, for those of you listening going test strips, the test strips are actually for distribution to those who use drugs, to check the drugs that they're taking to find out, are they laced with fentanyl? Are they laced with xylazine? Because both are significant contributors to the severity of an overdose. And so rather than just simply putting a post in Front Porch Forum and say, hey, we have NARCAN, it's important to also work out a protocol for distributing these test strips to those who may need them. And so we are reaching out to Vermont Cares to say, what are your recommendations? We also intend to speak to the Richmond Rescue as the local experts to let them know that we have these, and to, if they already have a program for distributing the test strips, perhaps we could work with them. But we do have NARCAN in the building. We have 50 doses, and VT Cares is prepared to give us more as we need it. Our hope, of course, is that we don't need it, but we know we don't live in a perfect world. Are there any questions from members of the select board about NARCAN? So, yeah.
Can you explain what the xylazine is?
Xylazine is, that's a great question. I should have had it at my fingertips. Xylazine is something that is added to certain illicit street drugs to increase its potency, but it also has a habit of increasing its lethality. And so it is beneficial if you know that you've got some.
Jay, this is Bart. If I recall correctly, NARCAN does not actually work for that medication?
You may be right. That's not something I remember coming up during the training. It was more focused on the administration. But xylazine, oh, it's a horse tranquilizer. Okay, and so it's not something that you want in your drugs. And if it is in your drugs, if you're correct, and you probably are, that it prevents NARCAN from working, then it's to everybody's interest to know that it's there. David, do you have anything to?
Just NARCAN is a miracle drug. It's highly effective if used in time and correctly.
Right, Mary.
I'll be brief. Were gloves included in those kits? Because from what I pick up a lot of stuff off the floor and stuff like that. And if you see a white pattern, I'm inclined to sweep it up. And I think gloves are not a bad idea. If they're not already in the kit, they probably should be.
You know, I don't remember seeing the gloves when
Thank
Connie and I unpacked them, but that would be a good thing to look into.
Get some gloves, yeah, I think we had, yeah.
Okay, so this is, you know, I consider this a priority that we come up with a protocol for making people aware that we have these. Obviously, we want them to go to Richmond Rescue first as the experts, but if they are not available, they need to, or if somebody's in our parking lot and not theirs, we want them to feel like they can come in. So there's a lot of communication we're going to have to do. But I'm very pleased that we're finally able to get the supplies and that we have town staff who've been trained. And so with all due speed, we're going to try to take the next steps. Okay, our second item on the agenda does involve an action possibly be taken. Josh, would you mind actually quickly summarizing this one rather than me taking a stab at it?
So there is a Hillview Heights subdivision that is currently going under 2 separate appeals. And the way this works is the DRB has made their decision. And there's been 2 appeals on that decision, so now it goes to the state court. And essentially the state court hears it de novo as if they are the DRB. They'll go through the presentation, the applicant will present that. The appellants will have a chance to raise their questions about what they think needs to be focused on more, and then the court will make a decision. Our attorneys always advise that the town enters an appearance in these types of questions. Not that the town really gets actively involved in the case, but they want to make sure that they monitor it in case there is anything the town needs to react to. One possible item they brought up was if for some reason there's a question from the judges about the zoning regulations themselves, and if they need to be changed by some sort, then the attorney would jump in and on our behalf. But a lot of times these usually sort of proceed with the applicant and the judge and the appellant working that out.
Okay, so the question before the select board tonight is, do we wish to make a motion to authorize our attorneys to enter a legal appearance on the town's behalf in this case? Or do we want to move into executive session to discuss this in more detail before possibly taking that action? I will be delighted to go either way. My personal recommendation is, in as much as this doesn't commit the town to really doing anything, it simply preserves our rights to be involved, that I don't think we really need an executive session, but again, I defer to Bard, Lisa, Jeff, and David. Jeff?
I tend to agree, Jay, that this is not a complicated, it's not complicated for us right now. We don't have to do anything, and all we're doing is maintaining a placeholder that if there is something for us to do in the future, we might. So what I do is move it and get a second, then see if there's any more.
Okay, that's fine.
So I move to authorize the town's attorney at Stitzel, Page and Fletcher to enter an appearance on the town's behalf in an appeal of the Development Review Board's approval of the Hillview Heights final subdivision application. Jay, this is David. I'll second.
Okay, so we do have a motion from Jeff Forward to move to authorize the town's attorneys, Stitzel, Page and Fletcher, to enter an appearance on the town's behalf in the appeals of the DRB's approval of the Hillview Heights final subdivision application. Motion made by Jeff Forward, seconded by David Sanders. Is there discussion? Lisa?
Yeah, we're not the subject matter experts here. I mean, the attorneys are and others, I'm sure that the applicants or the, what do they call them, know more than we do about it. So
The appellants, yeah.
yeah, it's not anything that we bring to the table, as far as.
Yeah, it's just legally saying we wish a seat at the table. We may not use it, but we wish to have that right.
Yeah, just to be informed, yeah.
Jeff?
The only other thing that I would state is this motion does not put us on one side or the other side
Right.
of this issue. It's purely informational, so we're not taking a position. with
Right.
This motion.
Right. I am not an attorney, nor do I play one on TV, but one term I've often heard in cases like this is amicus curiae. Somebody who is not on either side, but wishes to be an interested party in a legal sense. Bard?
Yeah, I'd add it basically, as I understand it, preserves our future ability to have a voice. But I'd also point out for those who are interested that this does not commit us to spending a bunch of money on attorney fees or attorney time. This is just sort of our, we give ourselves a yellow light to join later and a green light should we choose to do so.
Is there a comment from any member of the public about this? Okay. Seeing no further discussion, are we ready for a vote? Okay, the motion is to authorize the town's attorneys, Stitzel, Page and Fletcher, to enter an appearance on the town's behalf in the appeals of the Development Review Board's approval of Hillview Heights final subdivision application. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, aye.
Jeff, I. David, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda relates to the Andrews Community Forest. There is an at-large seat currently open on the Andrews Community Forest Committee. Mr. Wright Preston, who's present with us tonight, has applied to be appointed to that seat. The Andrews Community Forest Committee has two constituent supporting committees as well, the Richmond Trails Commission and the Richmond Conservation Commission, both of which are separate bodies, but who have a right to have a say in ACFC's membership. The Richmond Trails Committee voted 6-0 against nominating Preston for the seat. The Richmond Trails Committee for the seat based on the Richmond Trails Commission recommendation. The Richmond Trails Commission then took a second vote to see if there was general support for Preston. The result was split 3-3. The Conservation Commission voted in favor of Preston being appointed, but that's just simply a vote of general support as the seat reserved for a member of the RCC and the seat reserved as a recommendation of the RCC are both currently filled. Then finally, the Andrews Community Forest Committee itself voted unanimously to nominate Preston for the seat on the ACFC. The following documents are in the packet. Preston's application, the ACFC minutes specifically discussing Preston, an email from the ACFC regarding Preston, minutes from the Richmond Conservation Commission meeting discussing Preston, and minutes from the Richmond Trails Committee meeting discussing Preston. So the just question before us is, do we wish to move to appoint Wright Preston to the at-large seat on the ACFC with the term expiring in 2024?
We discussed it for a while.
Absolutely. So the floor is now open. If any members of the select board would like to speak to this. Lisa?
Jay, I'm confused by, I guess both the, Trails Committees and, Conservation Commissions trying to go both ways at the same time. I don't really know what they're meaning by their votes. You know, their input's important because they've got more experience with Wright than we do.
Well, I think I can help a little bit with that.
Please do.
The Richmond Trails Committee, again, voted 6-0
Mhm.
against nominating Preston Wright.
First time.
I feel weird saying Preston when you're sitting right here. Against nominating Wright as somebody who would represent the Trails Committee's interests
Right.
on the ACFC.
Mhm.
Now, do they think he would be a good member of the ACFC committee in a general sense? Well,
Apparently.
that 3-3. But in terms of, is this somebody that we see would carry water for us at the ACFC?
Mhm.
That was 6-0 against.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, do we think he's a good guy?
Question unanswered.
Yeah.
What was their distinction there?
Well, I would prefer to leave that to what's said in the emails.
Yeah.
Mhm. I read those too.
Yeah.
See.
But that's the sense I got with, well, 3-3, we think he's a good guy, he probably would contribute to the meeting, to the committee, or not,
Mhm.
versus he's somebody that we could say, please take these issues to the ACFC and advocate on our behalf for them. And that was a 6-0 against.
Good point.
Bard?
You know, I'm sure you're planning on doing this, but my suggestion, Jay, is ask Wright Preston to come forth and make a statement, respond to any questions we might have, and then maybe continue a discussion.
Absolutely. So, right, at this point, since there seems to be no further questions from the select board directly, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good evening. And I was at the Trails Committee meeting here a couple of weeks ago. It was a very cordial meeting and we talked about Andrews Community Forest and we talked about trails and how I could be helpful. And as the minutes say, they ideally would prefer a candidate that has a very pro mountain bike perspective. And my perspective tends to be somewhat neutral on mountain bikes, but I'm very supportive of the community forest and activities, the public's activities, wildlife's activities on the forest. I will say that this isn't a conflict, but I am an abutting landowner on the northeast section of the town forest. It's a very rugged piece of forest land in that section. So it's not an area where there are currently any trails. There are not logging roads that intersect there because of the topography. I've served on two committees related to the town forest previously and stopped a few years back, but I have time and I'm interested and it's an awesome place. Happy to help, happy to be a part of the committee if that's your pleasure. I'm kind of a sort of, with respect to the Andrews Community Forest, I'm kind of a bureaucrat, an administrator. I want to know where the boundary lines are. I want to work with the two utilities that take up a lot of space in the middle of it. And they've created in the last couple of years some major industrial development there. That is, it's their right. It's not ideal. And if we can soften that industrial use, that industrial feel, and allow it to be more pedestrian and some mountain bike and wildlife, I think it's better for the forest and the adjoining forests. I supported the logging activity that took place with the county forester supervising it 3 or 4 years ago. It ended quickly with some muddy conditions, but it all worked out great in the end. So when you walk in there now, you hardly know logging took place other than there's some stumps. I was on the property this past weekend. I'm there frequently. I walk it, pick up litter, have ideas for thinking about how we can, as a committee, march forward with solutions. And let's get a timeline to work on the revised management plan.
Mhm.
Let's have a timeline for conversation about trails and a trail management plan. So I'm happy to help. I have experience with it. And I have time.
Okay, questions, Jeff?
So we've had some, there's been some confusion within the Andrews Community Forest on how committees and the select board function, how they interact with how we as a select board interact with committees and how committees interact with us. Can you tell us what your experience is with town government? Sure. Many years ago, I was on the select board. Was on the select board when it went from 3 to 5 members and predating audio and visual, and was a part of hiring the first town's administrator and then first town's manager, and have been on police chief hiring committees. I've served on the first Andrews committee that was preliminary, and then the current one several years ago, and been on the Conservation Commission. And there are times when the Andrews Community Forest Committee tends to get ahead of itself, perhaps, with respect to policy and decision-making. And when I was on the committee, that actually happened as well, and I was chair at the time. There's a lot of energy, and we need to channel it and slow down on occasion and be thoughtful and report in and seek out Josh's advice when there are difficult decisions or when speed is of the essence, or get some help.
Lisa? David? Bart? Okay, members of the, okay, Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, right, your property right next door, I assume, is pretty much the same as ACF terrain, flora and fauna and all that. Would that be true?
Andrews Community Forest is unique in that it is all south facing and is steep from south to north. And that is, it's wonderful for wildlife. Our property to the east is in a valley, so there are different topography. So there's a stream and a pond in the center, and so there's western slopes and eastern slopes and northern slopes. But it's the same wildlife moving back and forth. It's the same deer hunters and bird hunters and hikers and cross-country skiers moving back and forth. And I've had the benefit of managing my family's land now for 40 years. Want to continue to have my family be a part of that if that's the pleasure of my kids, our kids.
Is there any runoff that heads your direction onto your property from the ACF?
No,
Okay.
no, that the ACF generally flows straight south. Well, I'm thrilled that you want to do this. You know, that you're coming into the committee where there have been challenges, and I personally think that you will bring terrific experience, expertise, and attitude, frankly, to the committee. So I'm really thrilled. And with that in mind, I move to appoint Wright Preston to the at-large seat on the Andrews Community Forest Committee with the term expiring
In May of 2024 is,
in 20.
in 2024, the year we're in, this is to finish a term, and then it would be,
Reappointed in 2024. This is David, I'll second.
okay, so Jeff Ford has made a motion to appoint Wright Preston to the at-large seat on the ACFC committee with a term expiring in 2024, and David Sander has seconded that. Is there anyone present from the public who would like to comment? Okay, I'm not seeing the hands going up. Any further comment from anyone? Okay, right?
So if this is a 3-month appointment.
Mhm.
And then I will apply again.
Yes.
That's my pleasure.
Mhm.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Right, just a quick question. How many people on the ACF do you currently know? Any of them or some?
I know some of them well, and I've met all of them.
All right, I'd like to thank you again for putting your name forward. This is a lot of work.
Great.
Jay, just, I'm sorry, last minute comment from Bard. You know, I'd be remiss if I didn't raise this, I think. It appears to me that in the last couple of years, we've had a series of unusually sort of polarizing topics. Where is somebody for or against something? Are you for or against housing? Are you for or against recreation? Are you for or against mountain bike trails? I will only observe, in my opinion, many of those things are false dichotomies or false choices. That I'm hopeful that a strength of our town is to have rational conversations, and that it's possible for a member of a committee to take a middle course without being pro or anti a specific thing. I'm also struck that trails are not just mountain bike trails, there are other kinds of trails. And I'll state my effort is to be similar to how Wright described himself, as sort of in the middle. I'm not pro or anti mountain bike trail. I think it's worth having conversations about how different things fit. So I think it's just a challenge that we've seen, and I don't know if it's part of the larger political dynamics that we currently operate in, but I appreciate the efforts of many of our citizens to have sort of rational discourse, even with people with whom they disagree. So thanks for trying to take a middle course, I guess.
Well said, Bart. Okay, seeing no further hands up or discussion, the motion before us is to appoint Wright Preston to the at-large seat on the Andrews Community Forest Committee with the term expiring in 2024. The motion was made by Jeff Ford and seconded by David Sander. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, aye?
Jeff, I. David, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Congratulations, Ray.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, moving on. Our next item on the agenda is also an application to serve on a committee. In this case, it is the application by Mr. Ian Bender to fill an open seat on the Planning Commission. Would you like to come up?
Sure.
Okay, so this would be an open seat that would run through 2026. Before we ask Mr. Bender to introduce himself, any questions?
Yeah. Ian, what kind of experience do you have or not have?
I served on the DRB for a couple of years, about 5 years ago, and I was involved in the reconstruction of the town plan around that time also. I'm not like, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on the code, but I'm familiar with it and definitely, highly motivated at this point. I've got kind of a prepared statement. I could just read it. It kind of.
By all means, go ahead. Yep.
Okay, yeah, I'm a terrible public speaker, so I gotta. So if I'm facing these people, do I look in a certain direction? Or is this-
Camera gets you right
Right.
there.
Oh, okay.
So you're good.
My name's Ian Bender. I've been a Richmond resident on Dugway Road, where I currently reside since 2004. I'm applying to volunteer for the open seat on the Planning Commission that expires in 2026. I've been following and in some cases publicly commenting on the potential use of Brown's Court as a possible location for a housing complex. In an effort to learn more about the Brown's Court issue, I've spent some time recently reviewing Planning Commission minutes and meetings from this past year, mostly exclusively, actually. I found that the variety of work that they're doing on the Planning Commission is very important and interesting to me personally. I also found their method to be very efficient and productive. They generally
finish their meetings by 9 o'clock, which I thought was pretty cool, after attending some of these. And as a small business owner, it's appealing to me to kind of work with a group that kind of moves through things and makes decisions pretty efficiently. I think personally that the trend to reduce regulatory barriers to housing development and some of the mandates that are coming from the State House currently, while being perhaps necessary, are creating some tension between various stakeholders in the town. And just taking a line directly from the Planning Commission webpage towards the end of a section where Virginia recently made her I think it's like a semi-annual update. It asks if someone is interested in the question of how fair and equitable rules can be developed to help neighbors get along with each other, you might be interested in this work. And I'm very interested in that kind of work. As I mentioned to Lisa, I served on the DRB and have a degree of familiarity with the zoning regulations and how they affect development applicants and neighbors. Additionally, I was a volunteer on the development of the most recent town plan. I took a quick look at the plan recently, and it was interesting to see that quite a bit of space was given to what was then the relatively early stages of the housing situation we're currently experiencing. And I would say it's worth a revisit for anyone that's currently working towards solutions to that problem. And I brought just the page from the town plan that talked about that if you want to like make a copy of it, or you can access it on the website too. But I think that thoughtful creation of zoning and careful planning has a meaningful impact on Richmond residents. And I think that I can make a positive contribution to that process. And I really appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ian. Questions from the select board, Bard, or anybody here in the room? Jeff?
I've known you for a while now, Ian, and you know, we don't always agree on everything, but I really respect how you present your arguments, and it both with their intelligence and also with the respectful way you do it. I find you really useful member of the community, and I'm thrilled that you want to do this. So I thank you for that.
Thanks.
I want to piggyback on what Jeff has said. You and I have had conversations over the years and we haven't always agreed, but we have always had very civil conversations. And there are times where you've changed my opinion on something, and I think there are times when I've changed your opinion on something. It has been very fruitful, and I appreciate that. And that's something that I admire in people who want to do public service.
Thanks.
Any questions from Bard or Lisa? Or comments? Okay. Any questions or comments from any member of the public? Okay, then I would entertain a motion. There's one in your packet starting on line 90.
I move to appoint Ian Bender to the Planning Commission to fill a vacancy with a term expiring in 2026.
I'll second. It's Lisa.
We have a motion from Jeff Ford, seconded by Lisa Miller, to move to appoint Ian Bender to the Planning Commission to fill a vacancy with a term expiring in 2026. Any final discussion? Seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, aye.
This is Jeff, I.
This is David, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, congratulations, Ian, and thank you in advance for your work.
Thank you.
I'm gonna catch the rest of this at home.
We'll be done by 9.
Yeah, good.
Things are flowing well so far. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is a bit of, I've heard people refer to this kind of thing as bureaucraties, but it's important. It relates to use of ARPA funds for the northern portion of the sidewalk on the eastern side of Bridge Street. We have been looking at it as a town at how to spend the American Rescue Plan Act funds, $1.2 million, given to us by the federal government for various public purposes. We surveyed our residents on how they would like to see this money spent. And among the greatest number of suggestions were suggestions for pedestrian and traffic safety, which would include obviously sidewalks. Now, we did authorize, or we did vote to allocate, I suppose is the correct phrase, use of some funds for these sidewalk projects. However, due to an oversight, the $254,509 allocated for this project in May of 2023, which would include projected construction costs, a 15% contingency for construction overruns, and $35,000 for construction oversight. That total came to $254,509. However, the oversight was that this did not include final design. It's regrettable we didn't catch that, but fortunately, in the pot, if you'd like to, can you bring up the colorful chart? You know the one I'm talking about? Whoever wrote this really developed this in the beginning, really liked colors. We're bringing up a list of the ARPA projects and how they are currently. Okay, so this is the most recent version of our ARPA project list. This is a slightly more recent version than the one that is currently on the town's website, and we should upload this one. You will notice that we have a number of green items and some purple items. And the green items are ones where the board has already voted and given a thumbs up to. The purple items are essentially TBDs. Now you'll notice that at the very bottom of this list, we have a total of currently allocated money, $943,862.25, leaving out of the $1.2 million, $256,137.75. Now, one area in which this differs from the one on the town website is that the town website version shows no remaining funds, but that's because a version on the town website has a approximately $250,000 ask from the Recreation Committee for miscellaneous projects, and that money has been freed up because we're instead going with the $450,000, which Josh is currently highlighting. It's the second from the last green item. So rolling the Recreations Committee's request into that $450,000 line item means that the money that they asked for directly is now essentially available to be allocated, which could be allocated for more park stuff, or in this case, the request is that we would include some of that money in paying for the final design portion of this Bridge Street project. Now, what Josh and team are asking for is not to ask for all $256,137.75 because the final design component doesn't cost that much. The final design component that we have not currently allocated funds for would cost $49,493, leaving thereafter approximately, do your math, $207,000, $206,000 still to be done something with. For those of you watching at home and who are not as deeply involved in ARPA funding, the $1.2 million has to be allocated by the end of 2024, the year we're currently in, and it has to be spent by the end of 2026. The Parks Committee is currently working to get final costs for some of their proposals. And so when they bring those to us, we'll know how much money they will cost. But at this time, I feel confident that spending $49,493 more on the sidewalk project will not leave us high and dry when it comes time to pay for the recreation improvements. But that's essentially the request, is to take of that remaining $250,000, 1/5 of it to pay for final design on the sidewalk project. Questions from the board?
Seems like a no-brainer.
I think you explained it well. There was quite a bit of detail in our materials. I'm happy to move it, and if there's further discussion, that would be fine. So I move to enter an agreement with VHB, which is Vermont. What is VHB? I
I
don't know.
don't honestly know.
I know it's an engineering firm.
It's engineering.
It's our engineering firm who's already working on it.
For final design for the northern portion of the sidewalk on the eastern side of Bridge Street, and approve the use of $49,493 in ARPA funds to pay for this work.
But now second.
Okay, so Mr. Jeff Ford has made a motion to enter into an agreement with our engineering firm VHB for final design for the northern portion of the sidewalk on the eastern side of Bridge Street and to approve the use of $49,493 in ARPA funds to pay for this work. That motion was seconded by Lisa Miller. Is there additional discussion?
The other comment I want to make is you did a great overview of that. You said spend the ARPA money. I would suggest we say we're investing the ARPA money.
That is a good point. And that's, I think that that's worthy of echoing, because one of the criteria that we had for the ARPA money was it'd be long-term improvements. Not, there was a joke made at the very beginning of the whole ARPA discussion project that we could use this money to throw a party. Because believe it or not, some towns in the United States of America had done just that, as a way of saying COVID's over, let's be back to the real world. And it could be justified in various respects. And I don't know of anybody who got in trouble for doing that, but that is not what I would call an investment. This is something that has positive health benefits, safety benefits, and is presumably a long-term investment. Sidewalks don't last forever, but they certainly last more than the streamers and bunting you put up for a party. Angela, go ahead. Angela, we are not hearing you. You're unmuted, but you are silent.
Walked away from that.
Still not hearing you. You muted and then unmuted, but you're still silent.
Could you
Perhaps
try-
enter your question in the
Chat.
chat or maybe call in.
I will say, today I walked on the south side of Bridge Street, on the sidewalk on the south side of Bridge Street. I have to say, I really enjoyed it. It's a different experience than it was before. Coming from the grocery store and walking towards the bridge and the river, it's really nicely done. And it changes the experience of Bridge Street. I'm looking forward to that on the south side as well. I think it'll really change the feel of the village. So I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so Angela Cote's question is the 49,000 for the complete project design, or is it in addition to the other funds allocated for the design?
So it's in addition to the initial $254,000 that was allocated by the board in last spring, was essentially for construction, a contingency on that construction and project oversight. So having an engineer on site for the project, for the construction. So this $49,000 would be in addition to that. The total project cost to around 305 roughly, if you include that.
Okay. One thing that I've heard from numerous resources at places like the Vermont League of Cities and Towns is that landscaping, parks, and sidewalks may not have as direct an economic benefit as you might think in some cases, but it has a lot to do with public perception. Somebody who drives through town thinks, do I want to locate here? Do I want to put my business here? They want to see a thriving town that has its act together. And I'm also a big safety person, so the safety aspect is the most important for me. But I think, as Jeff has said, when you see that a town's downtown is being taken care of, you walk on it, you can see the improvements. I think that's worth citing. Okay, I see hands up from Bard and then from Carol, so let's go to them.
So briefly, Kay, I actually curiously picks up on something you just said, that if this is original construction, we should all, select board members and citizens, taxpayers, have our eyes open that as we build stuff, we have to maintain it in the future. And that has not always been our strength in the past, by which I mean maintaining our infrastructure such as sidewalks. So just to make the obvious comment that creating the design and initial construction of a sidewalk, at some point in the future, there has to be repair and maintenance. So just eyes open on those kinds of things for what that is.
And Bard, to that point, I believe it's been brought up at a few budget meetings, but I don't think any specific action was taken on it. That potentially a capital fund for ongoing sidewalk repair, so that we're setting some money aside each year instead of one wet day looking up and going, wow, we should fix those, and having to take it all out of a current budget. But as I said, I don't think we've taken any formal action in that regard, but it is a good point. Nothing lasts forever. Things do have to be maintained. Okay, Kara?
Bard, thank you. I echo your comment on that. I really appreciate you bringing that up. The piece of the puzzle that I'd like to make sure of is that we are actually going to, if somebody's going to manage the project, if this is part of the project, final project design is also managing the project, is that we hold those overseeing the project accountable if there's issues with the project itself, because we have a history of not maintaining things, but we also have a history, like the water tower, if something's not installed correctly to begin with, of not making them fix it or pay because their oversight was in error. You know, their project management wasn't perfect. They had flaws and they needed to fix things. So I just want to make sure that when we pay somebody to do a job, we're holding them accountable for the job they are doing, along with maintaining stuff in the future. The last piece of comment that I'd like to make is about the 49,000 in the budget for new sidewalks. You might have set aside money in the last year's budget and this year's budget for the purpose of helping with phase one or phase two of this project. So if that's the case, you might want to move those funds that you've already budgeted into that maintenance sidewalk account rather than a new sidewalk account.
I see where she's going.
Thought we had 35,000 set aside for that. I might be wrong.
Right, so the money that's currently,
Sorry.
go ahead, Josh.
Like I said, I thought that we had taken that out when we determined we're gonna fund both of these with ARPA money. But it's worth looking back into to see if there's more there that we could put into a maintenance fund. But
Yeah.
Good point.
And
Okay.
I wasn't 100% sure either way, Jay and Josh. I just wanted to remind you that we don't need new sidewalk money if we're going to take it out of the ARPA. We need sidewalk maintenance money.
Correct.
Yeah.
And Kara's point, for those of you, again, I tend to try to explain things for people who aren't on all these meetings. There has been some questions about the water tank up on Jericho Road because of the existing efflorescence on the side of the tank. The tank shows some external signs of damage, and have we had the diver go in and do the full inspection?
So the diver's gone in, done the inspection. We're having issues getting the video to our engineers to review it. And as soon as Tyler gets that, he'll review it and give us a better assessment of the tank.
But I think what Kara said is correct. You need to make sure that when you spend money of this scale, that you get guarantees. And I think another area, obviously, that could be applied to is the traffic signs, which we are finally taking some action on. But I think we all agree should not have taken this long. So I think keeping an eye on the project, the contract, and making sure that this is all essentially warranted, I guess is the way to put it.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Jay. I appreciate that. Thank you. And it's 1/5 the cost, so it's not like it's only 1% of the cost.
Correct.
My recollection of when we talked about the reserve accounts is, Pete was pretty clear that once we get done with this and we get done with East Main Street, that it's not likely that we're looking at more new sidewalk. And we were gonna change the name on that reserve account to sidewalk reserve account rather than new sidewalk reserve account.
Right, yeah, we carved out.
Did we talk about that?
I think, didn't we end up with both? Because we had some money for new sidewalks, for potential new ones, and we also had the reserve. I think that's how the budget was finalized.
Yes, I think you have both.
You're right, we started going down that path, and that was one of the suggestions too of Chris Cole of looking at, well, Pete's got money for maintenance, but transportation committee wanted money for what's next and what's in the pipeline. So yeah, I think we've already made that division.
So in the reserve account spreadsheet, it says new sidewalk reserve, and at The actual balance at the end of last month was 65,000.
Okay, so yeah, we could revisit that and see if we wanted to change it, move any of that over to maintenance, but I know Transportation Committee also still has some other plans, so we want to make sure, and like you said, East Main Street as well. Okay.
Okay. I apologize. Much has been said. Did we have a motion for this yet?
Yes, we do.
Okay, you made it and Lisa seconded it? Okay, then it does come back. Okay, is there any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, the motion made by Jeff Ford, seconded by Lisa Miller, is to enter into an agreement with VHB for final design on the northern portion of Sidewalk on the eastern side of Bridge Street, and to approve the use of $49,493 in ARPA funds to pay for this work. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, aye.
Jeff, aye.
David, I.
Bard, aye.
And J.I. Okay, we have 3 items before us that are all water related, or shall we say flooding related. And they're all relatively short, but they're here to provide information. And finally, on the third item, to decide whether to take a particular action. Our first item relates to the Emergency Watershed Protection Program and our eligibility for it. And I'd rather just like to turn that to Josh to summarize.
Sure. So the Emergency Watershed Protection Program, it's a program that we learned about shortly after the July flooding. And we discussed it, that it might be able to help us out with the swale that was forming over between Esplanade and Church Street. And also there was runoff behind a house at 102 Tilden Ave, and there was discussion maybe that could help there. After those motions were made by the board, I was in touch with the watershed protection folks, and they said that they could look at other sites while they were here. So we added a few other sites in. So in addition to the Esplanade area, the Tilden area, there was also 340 Cochrane Road, which had some water running down below sort of a valley up behind the house during the July flooding. It was quite scary with the amount of damage that it caused. There was another section on Cochrane Road a little bit further down. We've talked about it before by the Beacon Preserve, where it kind of washes out over there. There's been concern about bank erosion there. There were 2 sites on Dugway that had some washouts during the July storm. And then there was another residence on Dugway. I think they might have gotten in touch with the program themselves. They had some erosion in their yard. I visited all, I guess it's 7 sites with the representative that was here, and unfortunately, none of them qualify for their program. As he explained it, the program is really more about protecting structures from sort of an imminent bank erosion threat of a river or a stream, and none of this was really rising to that level. So I think the first time to come out here, he spent several hours looking at each site and contemplating, but unfortunately, not a fit for their program.
Okay, questions from the board?
Summarize is just close, but no cigar, eh? Yeah. Thanks for looking into it.
Jay, by the way, VHB stands for, I just had it here, 3 names. Well, it's gone. Anyway, it's three names, and it's apparently based in Massachusetts.
Okay, any questions from the public on our lack of qualification for the Emergency Watershed Protection Program?
Disappointed.
Disappointing, but it is what it is. Okay, second, another short informational item. This relates to the flooding for the December 18th, 19th, 2023 flooding. And I'm happy to be able to say that we now know for a fact we've had all the 2023 floods we're going to have. We are fortunate that the damage from this flood did not reach the epic proportions of July. But on the other hand, that also kind of works to our detriment, because in order to qualify for FEMA reimbursement, things have to cost a certain amount. And so far, even though we've been tracking the costs associated with this flood very carefully, it does not appear at this time that Chittenden County is going to have enough damage to qualify for a FEMA declaration. But stay tuned on that. In terms of roads, there was a small mudslide on Kenyon Road, which was repaired the day of the flood. There were 2 driveway culverts and stage road that were damaged in the flood and were replaced within days. There was some small erosion to the sides of roads that was repaired within days. So road-wise, we came out pretty well. Canyon Road is the worst one affected, and our resident here on the board who lives just off that road attests that it's in good shape now.
Yeah.
Volunteers Green. The flagpole and Volunteers Green Monument were both tipped over. And a large crater had formed around the base of the monument. Highway staff have stood them both back up and separated them slightly, so the flagpole is no longer directly behind the monument and the flag is out of the tree canopy. There was a small amount of pavement in the Volunteers Green parking lot that was torn up by the flood. This section has been filled with crushed asphalt and will be repaved in the spring. The playground lost a lot of mulch, but the larger rocks that the highway put in place after the July flood to stabilize the base stayed in place. The highway staff has smoothed the area around the playground and are ordering new mulch, which should be here very soon, possibly this week. The company that we order the mulch from has a used playground slide that they're giving us to replace a slide that has failed. That is what we're talking about, a playground slide, right?
Later, so yeah,
Yeah.
that wasn't damaged in the flood. We needed to address that, and Pete was able to get a free use slide, so.
Yay.
that's
And
amazing.
otherwise, the playground itself was not damaged. The highway staff has repaired the park road. There was a large area of silt deposit stretching from behind the bandstand to the second baseball field. The highway staff used a skid steer to remove as much of it as possible without damaging the grass. The remaining silt will settle in the spring and grass will grow through. Fences at the ball fields, if you walked on the green, you noticed how badly damaged the fences were. They're undermined, but the poles themselves remained intact. And so the highway staff has repaired the ground and righted the poles. The concession stand and restrooms received a lot of silt. The highway staff is cleaning that out. There will need to be some drywall replaced, perhaps with pressure-treated plywood instead. And we'll need to disinfect the building. However, we have not yet replaced plumbing or electrical infrastructure, so nothing we put in since July was damaged. And town center, there was water in the crawl space under the post office. The fire department brought over a sump pump and was able to get most of the water out. And we will be hiring 4 Smart Pro to clean out the remaining water and silt. The biggest damage from the flood was the tree that caught on the Bridge Street Bridge near the sewer line, damaged it extensively. It is bent, is not broken, is not leaking, but it's lost a lot of insulation. And it's going to be pricey to replace, to fix, because of the way that the pipe goes under the bridge. The water pipe has already been lifted up. The water pipe is fine. If you look at the bridge from the Volunteers Green side, you can see the water pipe is higher up. Sewer pipe goes under the bridge and it was caught and bent. And it's going to cost at least $24,000 to replace that, because that's how much the scaffolding to access the pipe will cost. Water and Sewer Superintendent Steve Cote explained to us tonight that a bucket truck will not be able to simply lift around and down because of the girders that make up the bridge. It simply won't be accessible. That scaffolding is in the process of, will be built in the next couple of days. Once the scaffolding is there, they expect about 3 days to make the repair. If the pipe shows signs of freezing, we will have P&P Septic on hand to truck sewage from one side of the bridge to the other, because we don't want to run the risk of running sewage through a freezing pipe.
Well, when it's frozen. And
Right. Right. We don't want to risk things. We want to be prepared. The water pump house had some water in the clear well, but the pump was turned off prior to the flood. The system was disconnected from the pump and the clear well, so no new flood water entered the system. The clear well has been clean, tested, and is back online. Almost done. The wastewater treatment facility typically processes about 60 to 70,000 gallons of wastewater per day. During the flood, it processed 1,173,000 gallons. As of 3 p.m. on Tuesday the 19th, it's back to normal levels. All the water leaving the facility was fully treated, with the exception of a 20-minute period where the water was not fully treated, and this was quickly corrected. Now, I saw eyebrows go up here in the room and on the Zoom, going from 70,000 gallons to 1.1 million gallons. The only way to explain it is massive infiltration. We know that some people's properties both business and residential, have their stormwater pipes going directly into the sewer system. And we are working bit by bit on trying to identify that. But we also suspect that a large contributor is unsealed manhole covers on the floodplain.
Really?
And so we discussed tonight at the water and sewer meeting, acting with all due speed to try to seal the manholes that are on the floodplain and see if that doesn't address a lot of the infiltration. Anything you want to add to that?
No, you covered it well. Thank
The
you.
inflow to the sewer system looked to be about 20 times what it normally carries.
Right.
That's not just leaking.
No, that's a terrible
Yeah,
situation.
that's coming in.
And in the flood in July, it put us at risk of the whole plant failing
Mhm.
because it never did, but we came close. We came a lot closer than anybody wanted to risk. And so we're currently dealing with a lot of repairs to the plant as part of the 20-year engineering and as part of just getting the plant fixed. But getting the water, the wastewater and stormwater separated has got to be a big priority too.
Mhm.
Bard.
Jay, just another financial point of clarity for those of us who do not serve on both the select board and the water sewer. A reminder that most of this is, we're really describing issues that are within the purview of the Water Sewer Commission and paid for by customers. It's kind of a separate system infrastructure. The commission has a different responsibility. So while there is a relationship between the town and the water wastewater system, there are separate roles and responsibilities, including financial separation, even though there's some overlap on financial management like payroll, et cetera. But that's something to remind people of because it comes up intermittently. Why am I paying for somebody else's water sewer? Well, basically you aren't. You may be paying for water as part of fire protection because the fire department gets water from that system. But these expenses are basically borne by the water sewer customer. So to some degree, this is an inclusive view, but if you're concerned about the money, it's sort of over there. The other piece I'd say for in-town, if there are examples where, and I don't think this exists, but it's possible that it does, where a town stormwater system ends up in the Richmond's wastewater treatment system, that would be a problem. And that would be something that the town would be compelled to address. Frankly, is an awkward thing where the Water Sewer Commission would say, town, you got to fix this. We can't get 1 million extra gallons in from wastewater, including, or stormwater, including town stormwater. So I'm hopeful, especially as we head towards town meeting day, that's helpful to separate those. And I'll leave aside that sometimes people gloss over education tax versus municipal taxes, but this is one where it's even more nuanced. I don't know if that's helpful.
I'm sorry, Bart, I was gibbering a little bit here in the background. During the time you were talking, our projector here in the meeting room abruptly stopped projecting, and Josh went over and laid hands on it and drove the devils out, and it's back on now. But it's a good point, what you said. Okay, Jeff.
Yeah, I appreciate the distinction, Bard, and I also appreciate the summary at our meeting as well. I don't attend all of the water sewer commission hearings, but what happens in the village, affects all of us in one way or another. And I feel like I think it's important for the whole select board to know, what the impacts are of an event like this.
Well,
so I appreciate that.
And not just select board, but residents of town as well. I don't like the obscurity of saying, well, it was in the recording, just go watch it, because who has time for that? And the well-being of the water and sewer system does affect us all directly or indirectly. Okay, so there's no motion to be taken on that other than let's all go home each night and pray for no more floods. Our final flood-related item. Oh, and just to sum up again, we have not yet hit the amount that would trigger a FEMA event, but we're keeping an eye on that. We are tracking the money spent on recovery from this flood separately from all other wastewater and water expenditures, so that if somebody says document we can.
Mhm.
Okay,
Jay, do we have any idea where we are, or Josh? I mean, are we close, or we're like a quarter?
No.
I
don't think we're
I
close.
don't know. I checked in with emergency management today. They didn't provide numbers as far as where they thought they were, but I think there's a Vermont threshold and then there's a county by county threshold.
Right.
What I've seen, I think we were probably the hardest hit in Chittenden County. Washington County seemed to get hit a lot harder with this flood.
Mhm.
But there's folks that are trying to collect all that data right now. We were visited too by some folks to look at our damages. So we'll know more hopefully in the coming weeks.
Process. Thank you.
okay. We do have a third flood-related item
Mhm.
that has to do with, well, I was about to be chronological, a flood-related item that has to do with the flood. During the last flood, the select board waived all permitting fees associated with flood damage. We cannot waive legally the need for a permit, but we do have control over the fee structure. So there is a proposed motion in the packet that would say, per the power granted to the select board in the development permit fees schedule, footnote 7, I move that the town of Richmond Select Board waive any development permitting fees associated with the recent flooding event of December 18th, 19th, 2023. The requirement for permits in the special flood hazard overlay district and all other districts shall still apply. Only the fees are waived. So I've just basically, that's the extent of it. If somebody would like to make that motion or discuss it,
I'd make that motion. Do you want me to restate it? or-
I think you can just say so moved.
So moved.
This is the second.
Okay, so we have a motion from Lisa Miller, seconded by Jeff Forward, to essentially, as I just quoted, waive permitting fees associated with the flooding event, but not to waive the need for permits itself.
Do we have any idea how much money we're talking about?
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
for use
please.
of permit.
In fees? You know, so
Yeah.
both for fees and how many people are gonna,
I don't have a sense of how many people are gonna need to apply from this past flood. The fees, I don't have them in front of me, but I mean, it's a few $100s per permit. I think it's not a ton. So,
Tara?
Thank you. I support you doing this. And Jeff, to answer that question, since it's a maintenance or a repair and they're not expanding any of their square footage, it'd be probably the minimum fee if that's like $40 a permit. That's probably what the fee is that you're looking at, times maybe 10 homes, $400. But on the other side of things, after you all pass this and a future agenda item, could you put on possibly looking into waiving fees for any people that are getting a permit to repair flood damage or even fire damage if they're just repairing versus expanding or changing or improving? Because that way there they don't have to keep coming to you to ask for a waiver for a permit just to tell you they're going to fix something.
worth considering?
Okay, we can look at that.
Thank you. Thank you. It'll save you all time, and because I mean, every time we've had a flood, we've waived the fees, that's for sure. So the only other thing would be is potentially fire as well.
We've done it for fire as well.
Yeah. Okay, so any further discussion of the motion? The motion is to waive permitting fees associated with the flooding event, still charge the fees, but still charge, have the permit, but waive the fees. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, aye.
Jeff, I. David, I.
Bard, aye.
And Jay, aye. Okay, so that has concluded most of the quick decision item portion of the meeting, as I outlined at the beginning. We do have at the end of the agenda some legal business relating to legally warning the town meeting, but we have two other items on the agenda before we get to that. And I just would like to congratulate everybody. It's 8:13 and we are already a long way into the agenda. The next item is what I called earlier a let's discuss item. No actual motion is involved with this. It is discussion of the use of Browns Court for recreation and housing and discussion of a potential housing summit. So to briefly summarize, Browns Court exists. It has a softball field on it. It has some open space as well. It has neighbors who would like it to be kept fairly quiet and not changed drastically. It is, however, one of the few pieces of land in town that A, the town owns, B, is connected to water and sewer, and C, is above the floodplain. So because of those factors, it has had various people looking at it. We have discussed, could we fit housing in up there without negatively impacting the existing recreation field? Town planner Keith Oborn, at a request, put together a back of the envelope plan that would fit approximately, I want to say 20 500 square foot apartments into a corner of the field plus some parking and still leave the softball field available. At the same time, we have asked the Parks Committee with Fran Thomas and Denise Barnard and Ken Brzezinski, I apologize.
And test stores.
To look into using ARPA money to respond to requests from residents for increased recreational facilities. And they have presented to us with a plan that would put in a bocce court or pickleball courts, better parking, improvements to the softball field itself, and also some noise screening in the form of cedar trees to shelter the nearby residents from the sound of pickleball. And it's obvious that we cannot both put in a 20 unit apartment building and pickleball and cedars and bocce and all that. So we have two constituencies that both deserve consideration. The recreational constituency of our town, where we have people who need recreational opportunities and who have expressed a wish for that in the form of their ARPA suggestions, but also a lot of us care very much about housing. We have not taken any action in any way to write checks or to sign contracts. We have just discussed these topics. The most recent development on this front was at our last meeting in December, discussion of what we would call a housing summit to discuss with any interested constituency from within the town of, well, where could we put housing in? Could we fit housing in on Browns Court and still maintain its availability as a recreational field? Could we work more to educate homeowners vis-a-vis adding auxiliary dwellings or duplexes or infill housing? Who would be interested in building additional housing? Who would be interested in paying for it? How much of this housing would be affordable, and affordable at what level? And that's a lot to discuss, consequently the idea of a summit. And Bard, a lot of this has been your baby over the recent months. So now that I've summarized all that, I see your hand is up already. I'd like to turn the floor over to you for your thoughts.
Well, just, two brief comments and then give up the floor. The first is, again, I think one of the principles that I try to bring to my role in the select board is to listen to different people who may disagree with each other and let it sort itself out. There's a principle in Quaker meeting called, if the decision does not become obvious among a consensus in the beginning, you can let it season, sort of put it aside and come back to it and let it play out over time. I personally don't yet have an opinion about what the best use is, and I think it's an interesting time where we have, in some ways, competing goods. We have a good of recreational space and opportunities, and we have an opportunity with ARPA funds to improve that. And then we also have a housing crisis, and there's evidence virtually every week in the press and state government about that. So I just observe, I don't think there's anybody who's ill-intended in this. What's the right use? I would also distinguish between, is it possible to do multiple things at Browns Court from, is it desirable? And we might conclude it's possible, but not desirable. I think there are people who would reach that conclusion. That's okay. The other thing I'll throw in the mix, and I'm sort of thoughtful about, using fact-based conversations. Have folks here read the summary of the ARPA survey, which essentially wasn't really votes, but it was comments on different opportunities? So for those of you who haven't, you probably might be interested if you're interested in recreation. And this is sort of a test. What is the single recreation item that got more votes than pickleball courts?
Tennis.
Tennis courts. The answer is tennis courts.
Yep.
So I just think at times this is an example of why we should probably slow down a little bit and say, what did people actually say? And at any given point, somebody in the room may be a huge proponent of X. But I think it behooves us, at least at the select board and our committees, to be thoughtful about what did people ask for and what decisions do we make based on that input, which may or may not include that. And then I'll also observe that at least nationally, some towns and municipalities and even schools are creating multiple use courts. So that's just an idea. I will say, if I remember correctly, the third highest ranking was a basketball court.
Correct.
And you can see other towns that have put tennis courts and basketball courts together. I'm not saying it's the best idea, but it's certainly an idea and would perhaps address what we've heard from people about the different kinds of interest. So I think the task of folks on the committee looking at volunteer green and Browns Court is sort of challenging. And I think to step away from, is it housing or recreation? I think, and they're focused on recreation inclusively. So I just encourage us to be sort of thoughtful and conscious of this. And I think I propose some sort of housing summit just because there's a lot more talk than walk about housing. And we might conclude there is no walk be walked. We can't figure it out. And it might not be Brown's Court, but then, so what could we do? Do we think the town has a role in any fashion in addressing housing? I think of it as inclusionary, not just, sort of glibly the Cabrini Green projects of 50 years ago. Increasingly, there's evidence that inclusionary housing, where like people at different like income levels, wherever that fits, and recognize that I will personally observe what's happened on my street on Tilden Avenue in terms of house prices. I bought when it was pretty cheap. My kids, friends, neighbors, many of them could not afford to buy here. They don't have enough money to buy a $500,000 house. So that's just, I hope that helps to frame sort of at least my thinking and some of the tensions within this conversation.
Hey, Bart, I appreciate you bringing that up. Bart is absolutely correct. If I could share for Josh.
I think, Mary Claire has a comment, but
Yeah, I just want to share quickly and then I will I will be happy to take, so the list of suggestions that Bart is referring to, this is a list that is on the town website. If one goes to the town website and goes to the committees section and goes to the ARPA page, the link that I'm sharing is summary of ARPA suggestions. And this was compiled by me from a lot of more open-ended suggestions. Many people asked for the same thing, but use different verbiage. And so I said, okay, there's 39 different people asking for tennis courts under some definition of that term. And that wound up with 39 there. We have 24 for pickleball courts, 19 for basketball courts, 15 for dog park, playground expansion, 14 recreational trails and paths, 14 general improvements to volunteer green, 12 skate park, 9, and down to a lot of individual things such as bleachers for baseball fields, batting cages. So you can look at this a couple different ways. You can look at this in terms of specific suggestions, or you can look at this in terms of there's a lot of interest in recreation and any possible number of ways in between. The committee that's here tonight, Kendra and Fran and Denise and the others who have been working on this, did have some basis for why they looked at pickleball courts over tennis courts. And I think part of it, I'm going to ask them to speak here in a minute, But I think one of the reasons was you can get more pickleball courts into the same space.
Yeah.
So this is the list Bard was referring to. Now I'm going to stop sharing. And I did see that somebody had their hand up, so please go ahead.
This is Mary Claire Carroll. I live on Browns Court, and I'm love the fact that we just have sort of this discussion thing going on. And the first question I have actually was a couple of weeks ago in your last select board meeting, there was discussion of hiring a surveyor to survey the ball field or park so that you knew exactly what you were dealing with, which seems to me a good idea, whether you're dealing with housing or recreation, having an exact idea of what the lines are, what the property lines are, and how much acreage is there, I think would be really handy. So I was curious if you would move forward on that one. And as far as a housing summit, I really like that idea because despite all the hard work, I was really shocked in some ways, not negatively, just like, what? Wait, that with all the hard work that your housing committee has done and all the discussions you've had and the discussions planning committee had about housing, and I certainly agree with you that housing is at a crisis level around the state, and it would be wonderful if we could make some changes in Richmond to improve that situation, was that there wasn't a real clear sense of what kind of housing you wanted. And that's why I think Bard's idea of a housing summit or somehow, town-wide discussion about, do you need workers' housing? Do you need senior housing? Do you need low income? And what, how, and where to look? I'm sure there's some discussions going on, but we hear you have this great list of ideas people would like in recreation. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a similar list to work from, or you had a similar list to work from, about what kind of housing needs we actually have within our community? Do our businesses need workers? Do we want our kids to be able to come back and have affordable housing? Well, of course, all those different questions. So I really like that idea. And the third is just a thank you to the work the housing committee has done, but also a real thank you to Denise's committee. I really like what they've come up with so far, and I really appreciate that. And I thank the select board for keeping this discussion open. Thank you.
Thank you for your well-reasoned and thorough comments. I'd like to add that I am very grateful for the work our housing committee has done. The regret that I have is that it's so small and that we are not hearing from as many sectors of the town of Richmond as we potentially could. Right now, the committee has a chair and a assistant chair, I believe, or a chair and a committee member, and then a liaison from the planning commission. That's it. And the housing committee was formed, I believe, about 3 years ago, about the time that I came onto the board, and it bit by bit lost members and lost members and lost members, and we had to finally shrink the committee to be able to have quorums. One thing that I think would be a real godsend would be if we could revitalize that committee and get more people onto it. And maybe that would be something that having, a hypothetical housing summit could get people saying, this is a need and I have something to share, and get more bodies onto that committee. Because I don't like I know the people on the committee, I respect them, but they should not have to shoulder this whole load themselves. So we do have kind of two things to discuss. Again, one of them is what the Parks Committee may have to share with us tonight, and the other is what steps we might want to take vis-a-vis a housing summit. So I'm going to go to the board because I see a couple hands up. Jeff?
Well, so how do you want to do this? Do you want to talk about a potential summit first and then the Parks Committee second?
We can go that way, sure.
Okay.
If that's okay with everybody.
I agree with Mary Claire with all of her comments, frankly. And I think doing a survey would be worth that's an action item that we could move forward with. So I don't know who the right entity is to, get bids on what it would cost to do a survey of that property, but I think it would.
Browns Court?
Hmm?
Of Browns Court?
Yeah.
Oh, that's already moving forward.
Is it
last
in the
meeting.
works?
Of the housing survey.
No,
No.
I was talking about
The property
Browns Court.
property survey,
property
yep.
survey,
Oh, that, I'm sorry, survey.
They've already done that.
Misunderstood.
Great, okay, so do we know how long it'll take to do that?
Mr. Chair, may I?
Sure.
So on Tuesday morning, December 19th, the town of Richmond hired Chris Haggerty
Oh,
of
right,
Button
right.
Associates
I remember
to
this.
do the survey. In his commitment letter, he stated that he was hoping to have it done by the second week of January.
Excellent.
I put in a call to him today. I apologize, I didn't touch with him to give you an update. We have another meeting scheduled for Tuesday, January 9th. And we've asked him to be at our meeting to give us an update about what's going on and what has he found. He will be doing a traditional survey as well as a topographical survey as well, because of the ravines, et cetera. But that is all done, all in place, and he's working on it now.
Excellent, okay, that's, because it's really hard to make any judgments unless you know how big this piece of property is. And, right, and, it appears clear that the various different ways we can see the boundary lines, they disagree with one another, so like it'd be good to have professional survey.
Right.
And I support the notion of having a summit. I think that could be an involved conversation. So, maybe we should hear from, I don't know, what do you think? Do you think we should hear from the committee first, or do you want to brainstorm what to do about a summit?
How about we brainstorm? Can I say why?
Sure.
We're trying to work on one specific spot in the town. What other specific spots in the town will there be in the future? Housing and recreation are going to go together. We're going to grow housing. It's the state mandate. So we're going to be growing recreation. We want to recreate Browns Court every half mile or so, or, we don't have an overall plan, is what I'm saying. And the amenities, if those are put into Browns Court, will draw traffic from anywhere someone can't walk. So as we build in the outlying areas of the town, we're going to be increasing traffic. If it's a popular spot for recreation, good, but it's going to increase traffic. And at some point, there's going to be a problem at that intersection on Jericho Road. There isn't right now. There will be, particularly when everybody's trying to get out, or everybody's trying to get in. And, maybe we shouldn't do that to ourselves. Maybe we should disperse the recreation amenities so that they match where the population is. Right now, we know where the population is. Next year, we probably know pretty much where they are. Beyond that, I don't think we do. And to load up on one spot may not be the best use of our resources.
Wow.
So let me, if I could speak to the housing survey or summit. We need to finally give Keith Oborn and his staff a map of what our land use might be in 20 years. He could probably guess one as well as we could, but together I think we can guess pretty well. There are areas in the town you can't build. Okay. There are areas in the town that have insufficient road networks, but are buildable. Well, they probably would need recreation locally there rather than trying to drag all them to Browns Court or to the Volunteers Green. And someone tonight actually has made a point to me that Volunteers Green has flooded, twice now in 5 months. Each time, or 3 times? Thank you. Each time our recreation amenities have gotten turned topsy-turvy, and if you like wading through mud, you can still use them, but it's maybe not where we should put all our eggs in that basket. And so Browns Court does represent an alternative. It's above, I hope it's above the high water mark, and it's, but it's small. And it's already surrounded. There's really no possibility of expansion. So let's not limit ourselves to that kind of conversation where we're saying, here's our boundaries. Now, what are we going to do? Why don't we see where the boundaries are and then figure out what we're going to do?
Well, at least I agree, knowing where the boundaries are, and not just the boundaries. Well, in terms of Browns Court, knowing the boundaries, but also the topographic layout. Just because you have a rectangle that is of X acres doesn't mean that you don't have quicksand here and impenetrable bedrock here and so forth. The direction that we gave to the Parks Committee was given in the understanding that there is very little we can do with Volunteers Green. We did also ask them to look at the Round Church because it is a piece of town-owned land. Doing recreational stuff elsewhere, I know for a fact, as somebody who lives down toward the Jonesville end of town, I get questions from my neighbors saying, why don't we have a town park down here? And the answer is, we need to own some land.
Right.
And there have been pieces of land that have come up in the last couple of years down there. There was a big piece as you just start down Duxbury Road, River Road on the left, that somebody said, why doesn't the town buy this? And we did some very tentative inquiries, and we found that
It's under contract.
it was already under contract, but moreover, the price that they got for it was way outside what we could have paid. If we have a sugar daddy who comes along and says, here's a big pot of money, then obviously all kinds of options come up. But right now, that is the big holdback, is we don't have it. We have Browns Court and we have Browns Court. Jeff.
Exactly.
So, I don't see the discussion on housing to be exclusively about Browns Court.
Mhm.
And we can brainstorm solutions, but we're not in this business. And so we don't really know what all of the potential solutions are.
Right.
So what I would see coming, that one of the values of having a summit is if we could invite people who it is their business to do this, to tell us what they need in order to build affordable housing.
Mhm.
And perhaps give us some suggestions on ways we might do it. There are things like, many towns have what's called inclusionary zoning.
Mhm.
Where, if you have a development of a certain size, then the developer has to designate a certain percentage of the units to be affordable in whatever definition you do. I don't know the logistics of how all that would work, but this would be a good time to be talking about it, because we're thinking about updating the zoning ordinance, and that might be something we might want to include.
Right.
So what I would like to do is, rather than try to come up with solutions for specific properties relative to housing,
Mhm.
is have the discussion about what is affordable housing. It's just a lot of different things to a lot of different people.
Mhm.
Who can build it? And there's it's harder to do for a private developer than it is for developers who do this on a regular basis. And get some advice. What are the steps that we can take? Zoning is certainly one step that we can take. Buying property might be a step that we could take. Using the resources that we already have might be a step that we can take. I don't know if any of this is realistic or appropriate. The Browns Court thing for me is a yellow light. I have no idea.
Right.
But
Well,
I
Jeff,
think it's worth exploring.
it is worth exploring. One of the things that Kara LeBounty is fond of pointing out, I'm going to do it for her, is that regulatory and statutory changes in the recent past have made it possible to explore solutions that previously were not possible, such as the requirement that if you allow a house on a piece of property, you now have to allow a duplex, full stop. And the changes to encourage use of auxiliary dwellings, that where before it would have been rather difficult to say, I have a side of my property that I could put up a small single family home on. Now it's much easier to do that. So these are things. So to Jeff's point, and to your point, Lisa, we shouldn't just say it's all about Browns Court. Browns Court may be part of the solution, but it can't be the only solution. And so we do need to hear from people. Is it a matter of simply educating or having public information sessions for our residents on, so what is this thing called an auxiliary dwelling? What can I legally do vis-a-vis a duplex? Sometimes it could just simply be public information. But I haven't heard a person yet say that having a forum would be a bad idea. Fran?
There was a study done
Mhm.
not that long ago. That's on your website. That shows places that could have possible housing.
Mhm.
Why aren't we looking at that?
Do you remember if that was Brandy Saxon's report? Because she reported to the planning commission, I think, a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Might be-
But it's.
Yeah.
it's still very relevant.
Right, it is something we can look at.
Right, well, in and of
Browns
itself,
Court, what, I'm not gonna advocate for Browns Court
Mhm.
and stuff, but it wasn't one of the places that
Right.
exactly.
pointed out as.
Well, Fran, part of your,
I think Brandy's report is, I wouldn't say vague, it's not specific because we didn't ask her to make it specific. She says, we asked her, what kind of housing should we expect in the future and what should we look for and support? Okay, but it also,
The map
it needs to
here
go on the ground
shows-
somewhere.
right, but in answer to the question, why aren't we looking at that?
Right.
We have a housing committee. It's a very small committee. We're asking too much of a small number of people. Were that committee of a greater size, they could be bringing proposals to us in a greater number than they currently are. And one of the things I would expect them to look at, and they probably have looked at, is that survey. But that's one of the reasons we have, as you know, you've been on the select board long enough. You know that committees are there to do things. And so what, to a certain extent, we need the housing committee to say, here are the resources we have available. And I'm not pointing my finger at the housing committee and saying, why haven't you? I'm saying attaboy for as much as you have done. But these are some of the things that we can bring together, not just what is going on score, but what resources do we have? What funding may exist at the state and national level to help pay for these or their loan programs? Where could we put things? Where do people want to put things? Who are the developers who actually do business in town? I could go on for quite a while, but that's not the purpose of this meeting tonight. The purpose of this meeting tonight, among other things, is to say, do we feel good enough about a housing summit to begin organizing one? And if so, who do we want to ask to organize it? I can't speak for the housing committee and say, can we stick you with this? Because I don't know if they can. They're a 3-member committee. But they should certainly be asked, correct? I do see that we have Virginia here tonight, and I am looking to see if we have Connie and Mark, and I don't see them, so I don't want to volunteer them. But is Connie there? Connie, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking for your picture and you're a plant. Stop being a plant. Connie, would you like to comment on all that?
Hi, the housing committee meets in just a few weeks and would probably be very glad to discuss this. I'm not in charge of that agenda, but I'd be happy to propose that if the committee, when the committee meets. So yes, from me, Connie.
Okay. Virginia, you're here. Any comment from you? Yep.
Well, so if Mark, who is the chair of the housing committee, wishes to think that we could take that project on, then that's fine. I can tell you that the planning commission is engaged in other housing related issues. We're super busy. We're talking to Jolena Court about more units. We're have other irons in the fire that all relate to housing. So I'm not sure that, how a housing summit exactly fits in with what either the planning commission or the housing committee is doing. So I don't know. I guess I'm not wildly enthusiastic about taking it on, about either of these committees taking it on. Both committees have struggled with the affordable part of housing for a long time and have kind of pivoted to more housing, period, workforce or somewhat affordable housing. So that's the direction that we've proceeded in. So whether this is, exactly how this fits in, I don't really see. So anyway.
Tara.
Thank you, Jay. I want to follow up on, I took notes when Jeff was talking, and I think that's exactly what Virginia is speaking on is it's not just about HUD defined affordable housing in our community. Our community needs housing in general, and homes that are priced at a starter home value, those kinds of things. And I took notes. So the first thing on this, if you do a summit, would be to define affordable housing outside of HUD, meaning HUD defined is different than what we're actually also trying to accomplish. Number 2 was who can build. Number 3 was steps. Number 4 was buying property as an option. Number 5 was using resources that we potentially already have. And I would like to add number 6 for that to his list, and if he would agree, would be the history of existing affordable housing projects in Richmond and what the history is for the town of Richmond, because the one over near the rescue and what the deal was with that is often talked about in public, but not factually all the time. And I'm going to say that I have not done the research to confirm how much money was on the table. That I know Fran Thomas has brought it up, and I know a bunch of other people as well. So I think the history of affordable housing in Richmond is also a key factor, along with technically, I believe the mobile home park is considered a full affordable housing. So I want to go to Virginia's point about the Planning Commission being very busy, along with the Housing Committee being very busy. I think alternatives are going to be very key here. Like if the town really wants to look at their resources, could they put affordable housing or 1 or 2 units where the old water tower used to be in that empty parking lot? You've got other options that aren't being considered other than just Brown's Court. Now, here's my Brown's Court concern, and I know you're going to hear from your Parks Committee and all of that. As an ARPA committee member who voted in favor of giving $450,000 to a group to help determine how to spend recreational funds in the existing parks we have, if you put forward a summit that the Planning Commission doesn't have time for because they are actively looking for alternatives, that the Housing Committee, which is very minimal members, might not have time to host and to manage. How far out are you postponing, or are you going to make an extension deadline for your Parks Committee, because you did give them a hard deadline with a mission for how to make recommendations to you of how to spend this money? So I 100%, I've been in affordable starter home housing for 30 years of experience here. 30 years. I have multiple alternatives and multiple ways that Richmond could benefit that doesn't have to use up. The only park, and Lisa, this comes to your point, the only park we do not own, that we own that is not in the floodplain. The only park that we own not in the floodplain. The one in Jonesville, Jay, you brought up Jonesville. Jonesville did have money spent for recreation when we gave the funds to the Richmond Land Trust to buy the Bombardier Meadow. We have invested in Jonesville as a community. So thank you for listening to me. I'm not opposing a summit. I just do not think the summit should hold up the Parks Committee's recommendation to the Select Board, because there are many other alternatives other than using the only park we have out of the floodplain. Thank you.
Okay, to reply directly, only as Select Board member and not as boss, I agree, Kara, that we should not hold up the Parks Committee by saying we have to discuss housing ad infinitum. There are certain projects like housing and extension of the water and sewer into the gateway that by their very nature are not going to be solved permanently or even in a short amount of time. They just will take time. They do everywhere, and Richmond's no different. The ARPA committee does have to make its allocations this calendar year. We can't say, take all this time, do all this research. Oh, now go sit on the back bleacher until December, and then in a hurry, we'll all of a sudden throw it all together. I'm inclined personally, not as I'm 20% of the Select Board. I have no more say than the other 80%, but I'm inclined to give a green light once we've got the survey back to a lot of what the Park Committee has asked about, for the exact reasons Kara's just elaborated on. We know that there's desire. We know the Parks Committee has done a lot of work. We know that Brown's Court is the only place that we really can, that's shovel ready, if you will. But I don't want housing to fall off the map either. So we have an obvious problem, though, in that the housing committee itself is not in a good position to take on a project of this scale. That doesn't mean that we should say, well, never mind, but it is a factor we have to consider. Bard.
Yeah, and I think it's appropriate to move forward with both. So, my one comment to the Recreation Committee, and this is, you know, a preface to what I guess is about to come, is I think the number of people who can use something at a given time is one of several criteria. It is, in my opinion, absolutely not the only criteria. There is a tool called Bardoc's policy analysis where you look at your alternatives based on your criteria. And I don't think the biggest criteria is how many people can fit, because honestly, then I'd say we should do table tennis, because you can fit more people on table tennis than you can fit in pickleball. I think it then comes to a more nuanced conversation about space and use and desirability. But that's just my perspective based on policy work and how I view that. Turning my policy lens to housing, I said this earlier and I'll repeat it. I am not a big fan of huge, large-scale affordable housing projects. I absolutely think that we have an affordable housing crisis, and if we can't do something in our own zoning, our own plan, it is our failure. I'll put it that bluntly. Numerous towns around us have addressed inclusionary zoning, have made obligations for private developers. Example, you know, the buttermilk property, I can't, frankly, maybe I can be convinced, but at the moment, I can't picture over 100 units back there at market rate. I frankly don't think affordability is an $1,800 a month studio apartment of very small size. I think there's a role for that. I think in and of itself, that while capitalism is great, there's a lot of evidence that the free market has not solved the housing crisis in Vermont. So I think the question is, what, if anything, can we do, whether it's property, money, tools, incentives? To me, that's the point of bringing this together, because I think, you know, I'll do deference to the Planning Commission and the Housing Committee. Some of these things are happening in other towns, but are they happening in our town, and what can we learn from our neighboring towns?
Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, Bart, thank you. I mean, honestly, I am using this a little bit as a foil to talk about housing in general and recreation in general. I'm not overlooking what you've done. You've done good work. It's an example for anybody that follows for other recreation areas of what you guys have done. But it is an opportune time to open the narrative, because we are talking around the edges of it. And I don't see these opportunities come along very often. So I think we need to seize it and address Brownsport. And frankly, for affordable housing, Brownsport does not look like the best use of that property. We do need housing that's affordable in the town. We need workforce housing. You ask any business around here, one of the biggest problems is keeping people, and a police force. We don't have a barracks here they can live in. So we're going to have to give them all cars, because they're going to be living 20 miles away because they can't buy a house here. So that's not that many people either, but it starts to add up when you go this, that, this, that. And we generally need to identify development areas and essentially not pave the way, that's a bad metaphor, but to make it easier for that to happen. We've got some hindrances. We don't have a big employer base right here in Richmond, but we do nearby. We don't have huge highways ourselves, but we do nearby, and we have access to them. We have a lot of modern conveniences right within our reach, and we're not really using them for our advantage. I don't think people want to see Richmond turn into a town of 10 or 15,000 people, not right away or ever.
Well, I don't think
I don't think we have enough land.
exactly.
But, you know, if we grew our population by another 1,000 people, just think of how we could subsidize our waste treatment plant.
Right.
Just think about how we could subsidize our tax.
Mhm.
This is all money that's coming out of your pockets because there's no one else to provide it.
Right.
More people, we've got more hands to carry us. it's something that I didn't want to pass up the opportunity to at least start this discussion.
Right.
By using you guys for it, but you know, that's
Right.
just being honest.
Well, here are my thoughts, because we have another topic to discuss, which is the recreational use of the Browns Court, and they've been sitting here very politely, but I know they have places to be and don't want to be here all night. We have a lot of interest in a housing summit. We have no one who's jumping at and champing at the bit to hold one. Bart is fond of using his Society of Friends metaphor about letting things season. And since I don't see any abrupt action being proposed for tonight as far as advancing one, I think we need to revisit this in the future at our next meeting, perhaps, and see if further thoughts gel. I think we need to kind of compile the thoughts we've had as far as the various things we can bring in, the survey, funding, available programs from the state and federal government. But we can't do all those tonight. So with the board's permission, I'd like to call on our last two people whose hands are up and then move on to the recreational half of this question. So Kara and Connie, and then if no one objects, I'd like to give the Parks Committee a chance to share what they've done since the last time we met. Kara?
I really would like to encourage you guys. I like what the direction you're headed with this, Jay, for the Virginia. I really have confidence in her with what she's working on with the Planning Commission, that there are alternatives in what they're working on. I mean, they've been doing it for over a year. I think if they can have that house, I know she's serving on both the house, working with both the housing committee. I really trust that they're going to do something here. If not, a few months down the road, maybe I'll be able to step up and help out and really make some things happen here, because that's how I believe is put not only my money where my mouth is, but my time too. The point I'd really like to take is, Bard, this is really directed to you, because back in 2018, I worked with you as a water and sewer commissioner and a select board member to work on the expansion of water in the gateway to go to the mobile home park. The mobile home park already has a plan for expansion out there, that they wanted 50 plus units of senior housing or more that they could fit out there, and they already have it all designed. And you and David, who were on the select board at the time, did not want to work with them to help. And this is what I'm going to say, because I was paid by the park. I was paid by the park to work with the select board and the water and sewer commission to try to get this to happen. And what the park owner asked was that you, as the select board, would help them through the process with the permitting, in the sense of working with their planning commission and the zoning to make sure that that could happen. And it was not something that at the time either one of you thought was important enough to pursue. Now that housing is in a critical position, we're talking about using a park for housing. I hope that you have an open mind that mobile homes are affordable housing for people, and that I would really like, I don't know if the park owner would even be willing right now, he's in his 80s now, but his next generation might be willing to work either with a Champlain housing group to own that section of the mobile home park or something like that. But there's a huge opportunity for a plan that already exists. Thank you.
Okay.
So let me just address facts here.
Your hand up. Sure.
So I had several conversations with Peter Brown directly. And actually what I told him over and over is the Water Sewer Commission could not direct either the select board or the planning commission. And there was a way to proceed, but the Water Sewer Commission, this was his direct request to me on the telephone. If I do this, will you guarantee as the Water Sewer Commission that I can have X? And I said, I can't, because I don't have that authority. So it was not that I was unwilling, it was that it was presented to the Water Sewer Commission as a topic not in that authority, and that is based on at least 3 direct telephone conversations with Mr. Brown. That said, putting aside the factual question of history, yeah, that sat there. I actually mentioned, do you want to do partnerships? And at the time, what he told me then, it may have changed, he wanted to do it himself. I don't know where it sits. At the end of the day, he said, he sort of gave up and said he was not interested. It may be because he didn't have the patience to go through planning commission, zoning, all those things that would be required DRB. But that is certainly, in my opinion, one of the items that should be on our map. To Kara's point, that is a really sound point, that there is a piece of property up there that is developable.
So let's close out with Connie and then let's move to the Parks Committee. Connie?
Just pointing out that there's a housing committee meeting on January 24th. It starts at 5:30, goes to 7 o'clock. People are very welcome to join as guests if not actually interested in being members. And I'll certainly bring, and I'm sure Virginia will too, this to the idea of a broader view of what does the town want and need from a housing perspective. Brandy Saxton did do a report that expressed this in general terms, but did not specify particular properties. So to be able to take the next step, which I think is the purpose of the housing committee, we need to think about how to come up with that list. We've looked at 6 properties, brought that report to the select board earlier in 2023, and essentially were asked by the select board, identify options that we think would work. And I think we need to figure out how to approach that strategically well. And I think that's the question you're asking someone to take up. So that at least will be on the agenda for the 24th. And please join us if you can.
So thank you. And I want to thank everybody, both those who've spoken tonight, but also people who may watch this recording later, for all your thoughts on this. There's a lot to be done. It's not, it is basically the very definition of a difficult problem. Virginia, you popped your hand up, so I assume you have something important to say. And then I'm going to ask the Parks Committee to come up.
Yep, I just wanted to say that the items that the Housing Committee presented to the Select Board a couple of months ago were all from the Brandy Saxton report. She did, in fact, specify the properties that she identified as having potential. So it's all there. It's in the report. You all can go back and look at that report if you haven't, but it's there for you to look at. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I will try to get some announcements out into Front Porch Forum as well, encouraging people to come to that housing meeting. That said, we have the coin has 2 sides, and the other side is recreation. And we have members of the Parks Committee here tonight who were given a lot of things to research and figure things out about. So I'd like to ask Kendra and Fran and Denise, and if you have any, and everybody from the Parks Committee, come on up. And if we need more chairs, let's drag the chairs up. So, Denise, are you the spokesperson?
Do you mind if I just speak for me personally and not for my committee members? And
sure,
me, but I'd like to just my observations. So, and it's emotional because there's been a lot of time spent. And I just want to say first, Jay, I think it was at a November or December meeting, you put a plea out for more committee members for committees. And I hear where you're coming from. But as I sat there, and I'm going to be brutally honest, and as I sat there, I said, in my head, I'm saying, why would anybody volunteer for a Richmond committee when you do hours and hours of work? And then what happened to us in December? And I'm sure it's not the first committee that it's happened to. And everything that we had done, I felt like the rug had been pulled out from under our feet. It was discouraging. When I walked out of here that night, I was discouraged. We have spent hours and hours, and we have probably interviewed and met with over 100 people. So the motion, I believe, was made in August. The select board charged us at the end of August with a committee. Our first meeting was in September. We have 7 of the hardest working members, or excuse me, 6. I'm not going to speak for myself. 6 of I've been on many, many, many committees. The 6 people that I share this committee with are the hardest working people I have worked with. And
And
you
carry
know,
a lot of knowledge.
and seriously, and carry a lot of knowledge, and they've gone out and they've done their research, they've brought back estimates. Like I said, we've met with over 100 people on this issue. So at that meeting in December, when Bard and Jeff bring the thought of let's do housing at Browns Court, I can't even tell you how I personally felt. Like all this work, I mean, I felt like an idiot. It's like, oh my God, we've just spent hours and hours and hours of time. And now you bring it forward that you want to put housing there? Why didn't you tell us in August or September or October or November? Why wait till December to tell us this was a possibility? And not only that, when we got the charge in August, Jeff put a very strict deadline on this committee to have the draft to you, the deadline to you. And, you know, I understand the funds have to be allocated in 2024. I get that. But the night that the motion was made, it was a very strict deadline when we had to have our work done by. And we have been working with that premise every time we meet, every 2 weeks since September. I guess I just want to point out, we have 3 parks that the town of Richmond owns. I just want to say this for anybody who might be watching later. We have the very small green at the old round church. We don't own the parking lot. We don't own the sledding hill. We have that little tiny green. The second parcel is Volunteers Green, which I believe Kendra looked it up. I think it's plus or minus 22 acres. We all know we've been flooded in the last 5 months, what, 3 times? And you can't build anything there. What we can do on that parcel is incredibly limited. We had a meeting prior to coming in here tonight, which I'll let Fran discuss a little bit more about that, which was kind of deflating as well and sad, but I get it. The third park that we have, and we think it's plus or minus 3.06 acres, is Browns Court. Those are the only 3 parcels that the town of Richmond can use for recreation. So as I sit here as Denise Barner tonight, I ask you 5 to make a decision, make a motion, and make a decision that you're not going to use Browns Court as housing. I agree we need housing. We have already 3 subsidized housing areas in the town of Richmond, 1 in Jonesville, 1 down by the rescue, and the elderly housing at the end of Thompson Road. So we already have 3, which is great based on our population, I believe. Do we need more housing? Absolutely. The entire Chittenden County needs more housing. We've got housing going in, affordable housing going in Jericho. We have a huge project right now, Cathedral Square is doing in Kelly Field and Heinsberg. So there's a lot happening around us. And then also, I guess, Bard, I guess my question goes out to you, and I've been thinking about this a lot. You know, that you spoke a lot in November and December about you've been meeting with the principals of Champlain Housing Trust and Cathedral Square. I went back in the minutes. I couldn't find anything that you brought back to the select board about those meetings. And I didn't see where the select board charged you to go have meetings with the principals. And if you could enlighten us. And that, like I said,
Are you ready now?
Hold on, I'm speaking for Denise and not our committee. So I guess I ask 2 things. The big thing, make a decision on Browns Court, leave it for recreation for this beautiful town. And number 2, that you as the select board members extend the deadline that you put on us if indeed you want to hold a housing summit and put housing at Browns Court. And again, I'm speaking for Denise only and not my fellow committee.
Okay, Bard, you want to reply now?
Yeah, so the reason you didn't see it on the select board is because it was a conversation at the Water Sewer Commission. So the conversations with Champlain Housing Trust and Cathedral Square started somewhere over the last 10 years of discussions of extending water sewer into the gateway. So we had conversations first. I had conversations with the principals at Buttermilk, and I had conversations with principals at the Reeves owning the Willis Farm. Are you interested in any version of affordable housing? The Buttermilk principals while I called both of those organizations, would you be willing to take a meeting and just have proposals? And this was based on water sewer use at the time. Buttermilk was not interested. The REAPs were interested. We ended up having a joint conversation. It was the Water Sewer Commission, not the Select Board, because it had to do with the financial feasibility of putting water sewer down to that property. For it to be feasible, there have to be enough units to pay for it. In those conversations, both of the organizations, they're looking, this is like the 21st century now, they are looking online at maps of Richmond and saying, you know, we're not enthusiastic about that. We need water sewer. We also need sidewalks. Cathedral Square was clear they were not interested in the Willis property without sidewalks. Champlain Housing Trust said probably not, but maybe. Both of them, they started looking around. They looked at the things that we've already discovered in our own housing report, including Brownsport. That's how it came up. They brought it up by looking online at the maps of Richmond as we were talking about feasibility and desirability of the REAP property. The REAPs ended up not being interested because one of the things that those organizations want to do is to own the land. So that's that piece. The other thing, this is difficult, you know, it's an example where I feel like because other people have asked me questions and I bring those questions forward, the audacity of bringing forward questions that other citizens have posed to us, like housing at Browns Court, was not my brainstorm. Other citizens of this town came to us and talked about, is that something we could explore? That's how I brought it forth to the Select Board. And it didn't happen in August or June or July. It happened in November, December. So I don't know if there's an allegation that I've done something secret or manipulative. My effort is to bring stuff forward as they come forward. And to be clear, it was not my idea. It was an idea that was floated by others as a member of the Select Board representing all the citizens of every committee and of every stripe. It was my view and is my view that I should bring those forward as part of public discourse. Hopefully that's helpful.
Okay. So, that said, I want to apologize only for myself because I can't apologize for the whole Select Board, but I sympathize with how you feel yanked around. We have a lot of people we want to make happy, and occasionally in so doing, we get signals crossed, and I apologize for that. So that said, I'm eager to hear what you guys have found out because you found out a lot. You told me so just before Christmas. So spill.
I'm the person who was talking about pickleball courts, but at the same time, when I talked to people, I said, I would like pricing on pickleball courts and or tennis. At one point, before we even walked the property, I had a vision that we could do both. A series of 4 pickleball courts as well as a tennis court. Mike and I went out and measured and realized that wasn't going to happen. There just isn't any room. I have only been able to get in touch and make contact and get an estimate from one company that does pickleball courts, tennis courts, that sort of thing. He has given me a quote for the pickleball courts. I have asked him to give me a quote for the tennis. He gave me an oral quote for the tennis courts and said that it would be the same as what it is for pickleball courts. The difference being the fencing is higher for the tennis courts. Since then, I have been in contact with what they call the multifunctional courts. One company has sent me an estimate. It wasn't exactly what I had envisioned. They did put in basketball, I believe 2 soccer nets. There would be a tennis court, and I want to say 2 pickleball courts. The price came in at something like $168,000. That did not include any of the excavation. After that, I'm in the middle of pursuing another multifunctional court. It's a different company. It's called Northeastern Courts. I have been in contact with this person for, oh, I'd say the last 3 weeks. He has sent me 3 diagrams. One of them has been 1 tennis court, 4 pickleball courts. He's saying that's a little bit tight. And so he brought it back to, I want to say 1 tennis court, 2 pickleball courts. I fully like the idea of the multifunctional courts. And I think that they have a time and a place for them. I think that they're an ideal place for where there's a supervision of where things can be locked out, times can be assigned. I see it as a perfect place for, say, a bed and breakfast or a small motel that wants to provide, you know, some sort of activities for their guests. But you need somebody to say, okay, these people are playing tennis for 1 hour. They're going to leave. Then the pickleball players can come in and put up their nets. The other part of it is storage. All of these, the tennis nets would be permanent fixtures. The pickleball nets would be transportable. The problem with that is without a place to lock them up, I worry about vandalism, theft. That's my biggest concern with
Right.
it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I like these forums is that people can brainstorm it. How could we make something like that work? So that's where I'm at. I'm hoping that this week that I'll be speaking to that second contractor, just to get an idea of what the price for these would be. And also too, this particular person has told me that there is a court in Stowe. But he said, I will see if I can arrange for you to go and look at it or try it out. Just the fact that he said arrange, it leads me to believe it's on private property or a club or something.
Oh, I bet I know where it is even. Go ahead.
So that's where I'm at, but I have done some research on multifunctional courses as well as tennis.
Okay.
So I'll speak about what I've been doing, which is I've been trying to work on a path around Volunteers Green. And then watching some of the information on playgrounds. And I was totally distressed after this last flood. You know, I've worked on Volunteers Green been associated with Volunteers Green for about 40 years. When we moved from one field to taking away the cornfield. So to see it the second time was really distressing. And asked Josh if we could talk about where do we go with Volunteers Green. So Gene Agner and I met with Josh last week and we talked about it. Do we keep going forward? Today, I saw Pete down there, so I went and spent probably 15 minutes with him about what we do and his concerns about putting a new playground down there. And he has some ideas. I'm not gonna speak for him now of what we could do down there with the band shell and the playground. And then tonight we met with the chairs, the co-chairs of the Trails Committee and John Cart, who has a lot of, environmental concerns, and to get some thoughts from the Trails Committee. And that was kind of a discouraging conversation about whether it is a good idea to spend any money on trails. And John's going to give me some names of some people at the state to talk to about the viability of a path and the erosion that's happening along the banks and whether anything can be done to stabilize the banks a little bit more. So and then we talk about how do we make the band shell more accessible. All of this, it's really overwhelming with the amount of expertise that I have and getting people. Do I need a civil, I was talking about supposedly with zoning, you can, possibly take dirt from here, move it there.
Mhm.
So if we want to make the band shell accessible, where in Volunteers Green could we take dirt out and put it up and make the band shell accessible? Well, that's not anything I can figure out, but it's like, do what we need to hire a civil engineer. So there's a lot going on, but just looking at Volunteers Green and what we had envisioned and had it expanded to, and now we may be thinking we can't do much, what do we do there for the long term? We have one place that's high and dry, and the idea of giving that up is just totally distressful.
Mhm.
To think that we would choose to give up the one place that's high and dry. And you talk about buying land elsewhere, Richmond's topography is not gonna lend, it does not lend itself to all the open fields that have any land, are in the floodplain.
And flood.
You've become an expert too, Fran.
Right.
But I was not discouraged, after Irene. I was somewhat discouraged after, the July flood, but I was really discouraged after this one. I see picnic tables, and my husband and I put together getting concrete ends from,
That's personal.
from SD Griswold, and then manually putting those together and to see that our benches have, gone downstream.
Yeah.
I haven't walked the park since the December flood. What happened?
Well, since the December flood,
They said they're impassable.
The trail along.
the trail is
Oh, yeah.
impassable.
I walk that every day.
Yeah, I haven't walked that trail, but lately, I had before. So they're the trail people are very discouraged about how they can keep maintaining that trail in the river trail. So I'm really having to back off, even though there is a significant need for an all-access trail somewhere in Richmond.
They were very, positive about that, just,
Mhm.
they didn't want it on the left-hand side by the river.
So, just figuring all this out is just like, it's overwhelming.
Now to just summarize kind of where we're going from here.
Mhm.
We have the survey coming, which we've discussed already at this meeting. From there, our next meeting is January 9th, and we plan on being able to hopefully discuss that survey or at least tentative results. And we're pulling together, Pete Goslin's gonna attend, and he has, like Fran was saying, the different ideas, but also pulling together a tentative, what are all the small costs of what we're talking about? We've talked about the big costs. We've gotten quotes for all the big costs, but all of us pulling together the smaller pieces. We have 3 meetings scheduled for January. That second one is all about playgrounds. We have 3 different playground groups who have posed plans and images and things like that. And Jeannie and a few of us will be meeting with Tyler to see what Tyler has to say and what he scratches off, and where we go back to those 3 groups back and forth, so that by that meeting, hopefully we'll have had, maybe not fully in the black with Tyler, but close, but at least a tentative kind of idea to know which group is going to be the best or which options we have. That's our second meeting in January. Our third meeting in January will be the overall budget and talking about, we have $450,000 for the 3 parks. So how do we sit in terms of the costs we're talking about for the Round Church? What about Browns Court, and what about Volunteers Green? And kind of seeing where things all fall and what things are higher priority and the likes of that. And that's towards the end of January, with the goal of hopefully bringing some plans to your group to be able to see and visualize and, potentially vote on.
So here are my thoughts. This is me echoing some things I've said in previous meetings. I am prepared as one member of the select board, and I have no more say than any other member of the select board, to tell this group of people to proceed and not keep saying, no, we may put housing in there. Because housing is not something for which we're going to get a solution overnight. And it's irresponsible of us. I mean, I fully agree with what Denise said. And in fact, I'm kind of ashamed because it's disingenuous of me to get on Front Porch Forum and encourage people to volunteer for town committees and then say, but we probably will ignore everything you say. And that may not be the intent, but that's what people will hear. I, as a former chairman of the ARPA committee, know that there were a lot of people not just asking for basketball, pickleball. I mean, we had people asking for rec centers, we had people asking for pools, we had people asking for hockey courts. I think we had one person asking for a Zeppelin hangar. I mean, there were things that were just ridiculously, we could not even begin to imagine paying for. But the point is, there were a lot of people who look at other towns, who look at Williston and look at Heinsberg and say, why can't Richmond have some of those same things? And I don't like telling people, well, we couldn't get our act together, and so we wasted these people's times, and in the end, we didn't have housing up there either. And that's how I'm feeling it. That's how I'm kind of, as a citizen, I'm looking at this and kind of going, that's how I kind of see it. No one on the select board is looking to waste people's time. You know, we have enough hobbies without taking that on as a new one. But I don't see housing coming together in the time frame that we would need it to in order to make that all happen this year. And we've got the money. We don't have anything really jumping out as a better place to spend it. And this is a chance to make some really solid improvements to the infrastructure of our town. Some of them will, the one drawback about a lot of what's being proposed is that it will require maintenance costs. There's no way around that. But we've seen that what we've got, Volunteers Green, requires maintenance costs. I mean, recreational facilities, newsflash, require maintenance. Everything requires maintenance. Who knew our water and sewer plant requires maintenance? We thought it didn't, but it did. So that's my thought is, insofar as if we want to take a vote and say, proceed, we will not put housing in there. I would be prepared to vote yes for that. But I'm only one member of the select board. And I'd be interested in knowing what the rest of you think.
I'm worried that the optics of this look like it was competing needs of either housing or recreation. The way I saw it was parallel work to see what recreation would look like, what some affordable housing would look like. I didn't see them as being mutually exclusive. But I see how the optics look and I feel badly about that. Hindsight's a lot better than foresight. Yeah.
Okay. Jeff, Lisa, Bard?
Yeah, I'll jump in. What David said, I'll back up 200%. I mean, I think I've been there too, and I think I've helped contribute to that. I apologize for that. It's the kind of thing I think maybe going into the future, if we have to move the recreational facility for housing, it's a lot easier than moving the housing for the recreational facility. So it's one bridge we wouldn't have to cross. And I've heard more about recreational specifics from people since this came up. There's nothing, there's nothing to bring people out of their shell and so forth than to poke them with a stick long enough. And, you know, it's so people get poked. And I've heard a bunch of things that I didn't know before. I think they're all true, but how people feel is always true. You know? And it's, I'm not opposed to recreational facilities up there. I didn't want to give up the opportunity or the window for housing, and I don't think affordable housing would be the right thing, but for housing. But you know, the 3+ acres, 8 point something acres isn't going to solve the world's problems with housing anyway, or ours. It will help, but recreational be just as good in a different way. So
there's one other thought that I wanted to throw in, and Jeff, I didn't hear it. If you decide you want to share or Bart, either way, it has to do with parking. I've said this in the past, that one of my biggest concerns about trying to put both things up there is parking. Your point about if you put Tennyson up there, you've got to have some sort of arrangement where you sign them out and you enforce that. Otherwise, you've got the potential of 6 people showing up to play tennis, all saying no one's ever there at 10 o'clock on the Sunday morning, except when they are. Parking to me the same exact thing. If we have a hypothetical 20-unit housing building there, and we have 1.5 spaces per unit, which is 30 spaces, we would run the real risk of people for those housing units showing up at 5:30 p.m. after a long day's work in the summer and find that every single parking space has been taken by people there to watch softball. That's not acceptable. You know, you've got, but how would we stop it? There is no way to stop it. That would be what would happen. Yeah, and it's been a problem all over planet Earth. People taking parking for residents for something. People who park in an apartment complex because it's cheaper than paying for the paid parking a block over, you know. Bard, your hand's up now. Go ahead.
You know, I appreciate the timing question. And in spite of my allegiance to letting things season, you know, and not rushing into decisions, I think it's reasonable to ask them to proceed. Even if we were to fit some number of units of housing onto Browns Court, it is part of a solution. It's not the whole solution. I will say this, I remain concerned about the space question. Like, so when our planning zoning director said there's room for a footprint for a building and pickleball and a softball field, I'm scratching my head how we could not also fit a tennis court. A tennis court is smaller than the footprint of housing. So I'm just putting that out there. Based on my personal experience, I also note that there are many tennis courts that have post sleeves. The posts are actually removable seasonally along with the net if you chose to purchase such a tennis court. My first exposure to that was probably 50 years ago now. So just part of this is, I think, the why it's so difficult for this committee is you get into the weeds of every single thing. Is there space? What would it look like? How much would it cost? So I really appreciate the work that goes into that. And I think it would be responsible for us to ask them to focus on recreation, but to keep working on this question of beyond pickleball, in my opinion, based on the input that we've received to date from our citizens.
Right. Jeff.
Well, apparently I'm part of the problem, and if I am, I apologize. Denise, as you know, I have served on many committees over the years. I've lived here for over 40 years myself, and I've served on many committees. And where I would take exception is the hardest working committee that I have ever worked on is this one. Okay, and this one is really difficult. And what's different about this one and your committee is that we hear from everyone. We don't just hear from people who have a specific interest, because that's the name of the committee, right? So, what we try to do, and I would say all of us do, is to try to listen to all of those different interests and try to balance them. I would disagree with Jay that we did not ignore you ever. And did this committee, I know I did not, I don't feel that any of my colleagues did ignore you. What I heard us say is that we wanted to look at both options. We did not want to say, stop what you're doing. We wanted to see what was possible, and we were trying to meet multiple interests. I'm still not convinced that they're mutually exclusive. Our planning director said it could be done. Now, I don't believe that that's the final word, but that is our hired staff who said that we could do multiple interests on that piece of property.
Could I interject that he showed a building and a softball court, softball field. He had no room for anything else but the softball field in the building. And his footprint for the building was the building, and it didn't show any of the amenities that a building would need.
Okay,
which would then reduce the space of a softball field.
okay, and where I'm at with this is all of this discussion, most of the discussion tonight is premature. We don't have a full proposal for anything yet. And I do feel that it is responsible to try to meet the multiple needs that we have in the town. I feel that that's the responsibility of the people who sit in this chair. So I apologize that you have felt that me in particular, because I'll leave the rest of my colleagues out of this, because a lot of it's been directed at me and Bard. I don't feel that we've tried hard not to offend you or reduce your charge. And if you felt that, that's real. I agree with Lisa that that's what you feel is real. It's always real what you feel. And I apologize for that feeling. That was certainly not my intent.
Thank you.
Okay?
And again, that was my feelings, and my fellow committee members had no idea what I was going to say. And I didn't even know I was going to say anything until I started writing down notes. So.
And I realize that this is a difficult job. What you've been charged with is a difficult job. I'll also say that it was never me, as you said, Denise, that charged you with a timeline. It's not me. I cannot take any action on my own on this board.
Right.
I still
Okay, it's
feel
not
that
me.
are holding out the ability to pull the rug from under us at some point.
I am not doing anything. I am not doing anything individually. I cannot do anything.
I know that. I served on that board and I know that, but I still feel that you yourself would like the select board to hold back so that at some point you could pull the rug from under.
I'd like to make a request that we not, I'd like to make the request that we not make allegations about what other people are thinking. And if I said that, if I said that I think we were ignoring them, I don't think I just said that exactly, but it's possible I did. I apologize. I don't think we're ignoring you. I think what we're doing is asking you to work and then say, put in all this effort that we may then make no use of.
And we are elected by the whole town, and each of us hold different opinions. And people in the town hold different opinions. We are never going to speak as one voice, and we don't on most occasions. We do not speak on all occasions. We don't speak with one voice. We don't always agree with one another, but I think it is responsible for us as a board to represent all voices in town. And some of those voices may disagree with what you want to do. So I think it's our responsibility to reflect that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I do want to thank you for coming and sharing this. As hard as these conversations are, it's a lot harder to not have these conversations and let things fester.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
So in terms of next steps, we do have a next step next on the agenda about recreation, which is to say the Andrews Community Forest Committee. And thank you very much for your patience. But in terms of next steps on this particular topic tonight, I do not know, and Kara's still got her hand up. I will call you, Kara, in just a minute. I don't know if any member of the select board feels like there is a motion to be made to say to the Parks Committee, here is our direction to you. I don't know what that motion would be. I'd like people to be thinking over the next couple of moments about whether you think a motion should be made. But what I sense from my fellow members of the select board is that there is a fair bit of support for you all proceeding.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree with that.
And I'm not, while we are certainly very interested in housing options and exploring options and the belief that there are probably housing options we simply haven't thought of yet, that doesn't necessarily mean that, well, I mean, David has said they don't have to be opposing interests, but on the other hand, at some point you have to fish or cut bait. Carol.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. I really want to speak to one comment that Fran made. Fran, please don't just be discouraged. I really appreciate all the hard work you're doing for Volunteers Green that you've done for 40 years. Thank you. One of the points that is being made, though, with regards to a path and the floodplain and being worried about the environment and all of that, the town of Richmond is building a brand new sidewalk in the floodplain. We haven't heard where they're cutting fill from for that brand new sidewalk along Bridge Street. Just an FYI, that still counts as filling a floodplain, okay? So the path can still occur on the park. There are ways that you can do that. One of the suggestions is the riverbank erosion calculation calculates as cutting away of land. And that can be easily measured by the town engineer by going back a year and calculating how much riverbank erosion has occurred, where John Cart is worried about and where John Cart is worried about the trail no longer being. Now, part of the maintenance that should have occurred at the park was rip-wrapping further down the bank, but John Cart wanted to plant trees instead, so now we're losing the trail. That is going to continue to happen, but that is not for the rec group, the parks group to have to decide about riprap. But my point is, the calculation of the erosion calculates toward you not having to cut dirt anywhere else when you want to put that path in, and it has the same environmental impacts as putting sidewalks in the floodplain does. Those are two key pieces. The other key piece is the accessibility for the band shell. You do not have to worry about accessibility. You can ask for a waiver for any fill or concrete that you need to do to get accessibility, because handicap accessibility with the federal government trumps anything, including filling our regulations in the floodplain. It would be waived by the DRB and it would be waived by the select board 100%, because they cannot deny access. I don't want to, Jeff, I'm not calling you out. I totally respect that you have your opinion, and everybody on that Parks Committee has to understand that 4 select board members voted to give the $450 for you to figure out what to do with. Jeff voted against it. He does not support the $450 being spent on the parks. He's going to stay with that vote at this point in time, and that's just basically what he said tonight. So stop trying to convince Jeff to vote one way. They do not have to have a 100%. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't want people to call out certain select board members. We do not need to have 100% approval in any direction we're going in. The select board has recently agreed to vote on a new structure in the river. They approved a ladder for Umiak. So my point to you is this can happen, Fran. Stay strong. Stay with what you want to do. Please fix the whole committee, everybody there. But I know Fran had to do a lot of background work. That's why I'm saying, Fran, please stay strong with fixing the band shell. We need the band shell fixed, and we need that path, that paved path for people who cannot walk on the sidewalks, who need to be out of traffic, out away from driveways, etc. Thank you for all your hard work. I really appreciate it.
I am going to agree with Kara. I've heard a lot of people oppose the idea of a path around Volunteers Green. I'm for it. I'm pretty strongly for it as somebody who pedestriates. I don't think that's pedestriates, the new word. As a person who pedestriates more than a lot of people, I hate the fact that there are people in our town who don't want to leave their house to walk on the road in front of their houses because of excessively speeding drivers and so forth. I don't like the idea of telling people with baby carriages, including we have a brand new Wyatt Patrick Thomas Murray living in town. At some point, he's going to be in a baby carriage. I'd like to know that there are places that carriages can be pushed without having to be inhaling traffic exhaust all the time. I think a path, the biggest downside I've heard from people about the path is it would encourage more people to use the park, which would be noisy. I'm like, okay, come on. If a path is going to be the source of noise, then you have very, very high standards about noise.
Well, if it gets too crowded, people just won't go there.
That's right. But I want to thank those of you, not just the 4 of you who are here, but the others who you've worked with and all the people who provided their input, because I see this just like the sidewalks are an investment. I see this recreational stuff that we're exploring as an investment in the town's future and the health of its citizens. And I don't want you to feel like we're double dealing here.
Thank you for all you do too.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have one more chewy item tonight, and then we have some things about town meeting warning. Virginia, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage people who are thinking about the uses for Brown's Court to allow there to be room to put a playground structure there. If we have floods that take out the playground structure for months at a time in frequent occurrence, then it may be that we need to put a playground structure, especially if we're contemplating something new, we may need to put it somewhere else. So I would like the committee and others who are thinking about the uses of Brown's Court to try to leave space for that. Thanks.
On that same note, though, one thing that people bring to my attention when I say that is we do have the recreational facilities playground at the school. And I don't know, Jeff, you would know this. I don't know this. Is there
As of this summer.
Is there any reason why a regular townsperson can't use, like, if David wants to swing in the swing set, can he go up?
Last time I checked, we paid for it.
Yeah, just during school hours, you probably couldn't.
You're supposed to check in on school hours.
Okay. That would be my thought, Virginia, but if we can find a way to put a playground in up there, I'm not opposed to it.
I think what Virginia said, the best way to get recreational equipment is to have housing come with it or something.
Yeah. Okay, so we have an item tonight placed here at the request of the Andrews Committee, Forest Committee. The Andrews Committee, Forest Committee, I believe, is now fully.
No further than they were before.
So there's no motion, Jay? Just wanted to make sure.
It does not appear to be one, but there's still time to make a motion if somebody changes their mind.
Do you have the ability to make motions, or does it just the other 4 select board members?
Generally, the chair does not normally make motions.
Okay, so could you just ask if any select board member wants to make, I'd like to sign off. So if no select board member, if everybody just wants to apologize to the committee, but nobody wants to make a motion to see where anybody stands, the apologies are really nothing.
Does anybody want to make a motion?
What specifically?
The motion to say to the Parks Committee, please continue, and we intend to put recreational stuff up there and not housing. I don't know how we would phrase it.
That's basically what we said, actually.
We just didn't put it in the form of a motion.
You didn't put in a motion. It needs a motion for them to understand that you want them to continue on with a motion.
They seem to have gotten that. They walked out smiling.
No, I think they're still walking. I'll bet money they're thinking the same thing when they came in.
I don't agree with you, but we can find out. And if they feel a motion is necessary, we have the time between now and the next meeting to think of the proper way to phrase one and not something pulled out of a clear blue sky.
That's perfect. They could propose one to you if that's what they need. Sounds great. Sounds great.
Okay. So moving on to the Andrews Community Forest. The Andrews Community Forest Committee is fully staffed, and we have a lot of very interested townspeople who will be paying a lot of attention to what the committee does. Daniel, this is kind of on the agenda at your request. There have been some questions that have been brought back and forth via email and in one-on-one discussion about the best way for the ACFC to work within the town structure. And there have been, I'm going to invite Daniel up in just a minute to speak to this, but on questions like how does the ACFC spend money? How does the ACFC work within the town zoning structure? How does the ACFC conduct business while complying with open meeting law? And there's a fourth one that I have right here. I'm just trying to remember what it was. Besides open meeting law, expenditure of funds, open meeting laws, financial management, authorizing financial transactions, complying with zoning, and then trail construction. Just summarize briefly for those listening at home. There have been questions off and on about the ACFC conducting business via email to all members, which is a violation of open meeting law. I don't know how commonly this happens, but I've had several emails forwarded to me by members saying, everybody's on this, we're discussing this back and forth. Open meeting law requires that such discussions take with more than a quorum of members take place in public session where everybody can listen. Financial management. Twice now, the ACFC has asked us to retroactively authorize money that they've spent, and that cannot happen again. Zoning. There have been questions about to what extent planned trails and so forth have to comply with zoning. And precedents have been cited from other towns that while may have taken place in other towns, those towns are not Richmond. And in Richmond, we would expect them to follow zoning. And then trail construction. A case was raised about a particular trail, the Danish Climb Trail, that was possibly constructed without the required oversight. And the Ian Stokes cannot find any record of that having been officially authorized. So those are some of the topics that have been going back and forth. And rather than from on high dictate to the ACFC what I want them to do, I'd really rather have this be a discussion and see, you know, if we can't all see eye to eye so we can all work together going forward. And so Daniel, that's why you're here. So why don't you, that's why you're, so why don't you come on up and tell us what your thoughts are?
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for taking the time. I wanted to come and have this just conversation.
Maybe introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. Hey,
with the
Daniel
audience.
Schmidt. Hi, everyone in the E universe. I am the co-chair along with Ian Stokes of the Andrews Community Forest Committee. I'm also a very new co-chair, so I am a little baby in the co-chair world. I'm a two-month-old. As is Ian, not quite as young as me. But we have new co-chairs as well as two new members who you all have recognized in this meeting and the last one. So thank you for helping us get our committee back up to sort of full standing. And I just want to go back to, I think that was in the spring that we met with you all, and it felt like a very healthy and productive conversation. And so when these issues came up, you know, I thought of two things. One, I thought that was a great meeting. Emails back and forth don't always, for me, don't always seem the most productive. So a conversation feels really helpful. And then the second thing is we have new members and we have new co-chairs. And so there's sort of this, like, there's a vestigial tale of past committees that sort of hangs in behind us, but I wanted to make sure that we sort of set a precedent of moving forward in a productive way so that we can work with the support of the select board and then in compliance with all the rules and bylaws and everything like that. So just to date, we've talked with Josh about some of the concerns that were brought up, and I don't think there's any need to sort of say like what happened, what went right or wrong. I think if there's instances that feel helpful for you to like elucidate what the thing is that might help our understanding, that would be useful for us. But, you know, part of this conversation, part of the goal is just for you all to feel heard and also just know that we take those concerns seriously. And as soon as we saw that, we immediately were like, oh, okay, what are they talking about? Like, can we go back through the like paper trail and figure out like where we might have gone wrong? So we have thus far talked to the committee members about open meeting laws. We had that on our agenda last week and just reiterated how that works. I've been on the committee for a couple years now, and I can say that like in general, that's definitely not how we do business. And we know that that's not the way to do business. And I know that there is some gray area between like, I'm sending out information to the committee members versus like we're having a discussion with like in a reply. Also, I think that that's sort of like low-hanging fruit for us to say, like, we talked to Josh, we know the rules, we will definitely abide by all those rules. And if there's, in the future, if there's some gray areas, we can ask you or Josh and hopefully get some clarity. I think one of the things that might have come up was in advertising for the positions, we were like, can we make a Google Doc? And then if I've reached out to Lisa, I don't want Lisa to get a phone call from like Brad and then Ian and then everyone else. We were gonna like write down. And and I think maybe that was like a no-no because everyone was contributing. But again, that's like sort of done with the intent of like, oh, we were just trying to like keep from crossing our wires or whatever. So.
And for what it's worth, Daniel, it's something that the select board runs into as well.
Yeah.
We all from time to time forget to do a reply.
Yeah.
A little bit of guidance that we found useful is there are a couple exceptions to when can you, I mean, you can send information out and people should not reply all. You also have wide latitude to discuss agenda setting.
Yeah.
And to discuss when things should be scheduled, provided that people don't subsequently get into the substance.
Yeah.
And another is what they call routine administrative matters. So routine administrative matters is things like an example from the last year. When shall we discuss the annual evaluation of our town manager?
Okay.
We're not discussing the evaluation.
Right.
We're saying, when should we hold it?
Okay, great. That's
Right.
really good to know. Okay. Yeah, one of the things that Ian had brought up is like, one of his concerns was like, I want us to keep momentum going between meetings, which does involve a certain amount of communication. So you just have to ride that fine line between like keeping things going and that.
Right, and I think to remember is meeting, discussions with less than a quorum
Yeah.
are
of
still
course.
okay.
Yeah.
The thing is, you can't do what some people call a daisy chain discussion, where person A talks to B then talks about it
Yeah.
to C, who talks about it to D. And that's a slope that is very easy to find yourself going down.
Right.
But if you have, let's see, there are 9 members on the committee, correct?
That's a good question. No, I think we have 8 now because the RLT, Richmond Trails Committee, RTC, has not put forth.
Okay, so you're not police staff.
No, we're not.
I apologize, I forgot that. Okay, so a quorum would be 5 people.
Right.
So you could have email discussions with theoretically up to 4. 3 might be safer because 4 is half the current committee. But so if you want to say, we need to put this item on the agenda, and we want to make sure that we have our ducks in a row, what are the key points you think we should bring out? You could have that discussion with you and Ian and a member of the
Right.
committee, and you're not doing anything wrong there.
Right. And just to be clear, for our subcommittees that are working on work, same thing, is it 4 or 3? It would not be a quorum. So could we have a subcommittee of 4? I'm looking at you, Josh.
Yeah, so I think the quorum goes on the total number that are, that should be on the committee. So your
okay.
quorum would be.
You're right, that's
Yeah,
true.
your quorum would be 5, so you
Right.
could have a subcommittee of 4,
Subcommittee of 4.
because your total number should be 9.
Okay.
Right.
Hey, Jay,
And-
I think this is an important question because we've gotten more current guidance on this. If I remember
Okay.
correctly
Fine.
from our attorney. These subcommittees are committees. And so they unto themselves have quorums. So if it's 4, arguably 2 is a quorum, right? And Josh, if I remember correctly, the legal guidance we got are official subcommittees of a committee. Does this apply to, do you think, to Andrews Community Forest? Have to
Yeah.
be warned with minutes, et cetera?
That's a good question, Bart. Since the only one we've really been warning is the police negotiating subcommittee. And I haven't really expanded beyond that because I don't know if we've had any other subcommittees on the select board since then, but it's a good question that, we should probably seek more advice to make sure we're following proper procedures. I feel like our attorney was making sure with the due diligence, specifically with police negotiations, that we warned that one, whereas other subcommittees, I think there might still be challenged, but maybe there's less risk, but I want to let you respond to that too, Bart, before we just.
Well, I only call it because what I believed to be true 3 years ago, I'm no longer certain to be true about subcommittees and public notice and minutes, et cetera. So I will only observe that might be worth asking our attorney for guidance specific to this committee as an example, because it's a little different than select board.
Right.
And I will just full disclosure, I probably take a blame for some of this because I had a conversation with Ian, I don't know, a month ago. And it was not, I did not intend to throw any current members under the bus. I was more informed, I think it was Santayana who said, those who are unaware of history tend to be doomed to repeat it. So some of the things that happened in the past, I'm not looking to cast blame. I was not looking to cast blame. It was more like, so if these things happened in the past and they were problems, you probably should be aware of them and avoid them in the present and future.
Right.
And there were several of those examples.
Right, and just to add on to that, as an example of how tricky it can be to follow the open meeting law, I said something completely wrong a few minutes ago, where I said if you've got 8 members and a quorum is 4. No, a quorum is 5. It has to be a majority of the body. 4 is not a majority. It has to be the number of members who could legally act on behalf of the body.
Right.
And so that's 50% plus 1, essentially. Jeff, go ahead.
So I'm looking at the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns website, which is actually a really terrific resource on this kind of thing. They have a whole page on open meeting law. And they say the law applies when there's a quorum of a public body. A subcommittee would be that. It's a public body of, it's a public body of a public body, a subcommittee of a public body. 2 is involved in a discussion or taking action. 3, the subject matter of discussion is one in which the body has authority or responsibility. I would question that as far as a subcommittee goes. That the subcommittee would not have the authority to make a decision. You know, they could make recommendations to the main committee, who really doesn't even have authority to make a decision.
Right. And that I think is why Josh's example of the police negotiating committee, because we actually do, the two of us, I mean, Bard and I are the representatives to discuss things with the union. And we have the ability to take action on behalf of the town, to wit, scheduling negotiations and agreeing what the points of discussion are and so forth. So that's a rare case where committee actually is empowered to take real action.
Yeah, and I mean, I think which point it was about the sub or quorum. Typically, when we've done subcommittees of this board or others, it's less than the quorum to avoid that. But where Barb is bringing it up is that the attorney's guidance, at least with the police negotiating committee, was even though it's only 2, you should warn it, because I think there's some case law that they're working through with another town. And yeah, I mean, the subcommittee sort of has power because ultimately their decisions need to get ratified by the full select board with any contract negotiation. So it may be more power than a subcommittee of the community forest. But I think it bears a little bit more due diligence, I think, with our attorney, because are we going to really start warning every single subcommittee of 2 people talking to each other about a committee's business? Like, I kind of want to understand where are those boundaries. Where do we really have to do it?
Really a benefit.
I think one of the things that we're trying to do, you know, there's a bureaucratic reason for doing all of this, and no statutory reason at all. But it really is a public purpose to it all. We try really hard to be transparent, and we get accused on occasion of not being, and I think wrongly accused personally. Because we do really try to be transparent, and that's the spirit of what we're trying to get to, you know. And the both how you meet and how you communicate what was discussed, you know, count. The minutes really are useful. I'm surprised at how useful they are.
So maybe that's just good for you all to know, like, if you do find more information about that, that'd be helpful. You know, so if 2 people are gonna get together and make a map, is that a subcommittee or is that just 2 people?
I think,
you know,
you can avoid the trouble by not appointing them. Just say, hey, Bob and Sally, you want to get together? Yeah, we'll do that.
And that's, I think, any clarity you all gain in the whatever, if you gain some clarity, just send it our way. It would be helpful to know that, because we do have a lot of sort of working groups.
You do have, you actually, one of the ways that you're different than some of our other committees is that you have a lot of technical things that you're dealing with. You know, it's a big topic and there's a lot of issues. So I appreciate that.
I think it would be really useful to you, Daniel, if while the whole board's here, we think out loud, you know, about ACF. And if the chair is willing, I've got thoughts. I know you guys have run into obstacles or resistance, you know, through your history. If you know what we're all thinking, as our best or worst outcomes, preferably best.
Well, I would argue it's 10 o'clock, and I think what I took from your email that you were asking of us is perhaps to schedule a joint meeting with both. It's similar to the one we had in August.
Yeah, I think that'd be fine if you want to do that.
Which that's when it would be appropriate to have this conversation.
Right, it would be like this, except there'd be more people.
Sure, we would be happy to do that.
You know, we might be able to do that after, you know, the budget's put to bed, you know, before town meeting. February is a little bit lighter load, maybe. I don't know. Maybe your load is never light, but
after the storms and before the floods.
So I guess before floods again, do you guys want to have another joint meeting, or were you just looking for more clarification on some of these, like Bard said, things that maybe went wrong in the past that you want to avoid in the future?
Yeah, I mean, my goal in coming here today was just to discuss these 4 items, but if it feels helpful, and maybe this is just a thing we can talk about, I'm looking at Wright as like the one other person in the committee now. If it feels useful to us and it feels useful to you, we'd be happy to do that. And so I think we can, whatever, we can let it season for a little while.
Okay.
And then, if that feels helpful, we also have some we have some 2024 goal setting to do in our upcoming meeting. So I do think we will have a good sense of where we're going, and that would be maybe a good conversation after that.
If something comes up and you think it's a gray area, or you're
Yeah.
not sure, or you want clarification, just ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, while most committees don't do this, if you wanted to have the 10 minutes of the ACFC on the agenda for every single select board meeting, and I don't think anybody here is going to object, because I mean, if we're talking to you routinely, it's not going to turn into a 4.5 hour thing every time.
Yeah.
It would be
too long, and then it is 4.5 hours.
right.
The difference between leaving at 11:20 and 11:30.
Yeah.
Right.
Significant.
But like, the thing about contracting with somebody to do X, Y, or Z. In the past, like contracting with a consultant to help explain the plan to the public. And then saying, oh, by the way, can we pay for that? That's the kind of stuff that we'd rather hear from you about.
Yeah. So that was the case, and just so I know, so that was a case where the prior committee, whatever, the committee contracted with that person and then asked for.
Right.
Okay, cool. So that I also understand how that goes. So I think that's a quick item we can check off, because understood and totally accepted.
Yeah, and then the thing about the town zoning structure, there was a lot of stuff back and forth between me, Bard, Tyler about the degree to which proposals from the ACFC regarding construction of trails have to comply with town zoning. And an email was forwarded to us from, I don't remember which town it was, but there was a lengthy discussion about how in this town, they did not have to follow zoning because of this, and this. And that raised some eyebrows, because what another town's attorneys and what another town's zoning administrator may have been willing to look at in another town, that doesn't have any bearing here. And we tend to err on the side of strict adherence to town zoning standards. And so we'd rather ask our attorney, we'd rather ask our zoning administrator, and then say, here's what they say, than tell them what we think and say, prove us wrong.
Right. And I can speak to that, which I just want to say at the outset, the committee has every intention of following every zoning administration suggestion 100%. I think a thing that is probably hard to understand if you're not a trail builder is that every town does it differently. And it is a very confusing hodgepodge of zoning administration development review board, trail committees, volunteer groups that kind of put these things together. The way in which the zoning administrator recommended we do trail construction through doing an engineering site plan is also pretty out there. That is sort of on the tail end of the bell curve of what most towns are required to do. So we were just trying to gather information and say, okay, this is not in the suite of things that we've seen in other towns. So how does this fit in? Like, what does Heinsberg do? We were just trying to gather information so that we could bring that back. Especially when talking with Tyler, the zoning administrator, and he's sort of just following things by the book, and we wanted to have a conversation with him just so we could understand. And it's a very expensive prospect what he's asking us to do. So we want to make sure that before we spend many thousands of dollars of taxpayer money, that we know kind of what we're getting into, what's expected. And I think there's learning to do on both sides. But at the end of the day, 100% we will respect and abide by all zoning laws. And Richmond has, full stop the say in what we do. But it's also nice to know what other people have done who have town powers. So.
Bard?
Yeah, I appreciate the challenge. I will say this as my father was an architect builder, then manufactured housing. So imagine building manufactured housing and sending it to 10,000 towns around the United States, each with a different building code. I literally get it. That said, the arbiter of our zoning is the zoning administrator. And the history of this goes back several years, at least. It was not really new based on documents from the early days of Andrews Community Forest. I recognize the difficulty, and yet sort of there it is, I think. And I've heard many other people say, not just about Andrews Community Forest, but other examples where zoning differs significantly by town. And so what town A says and what town B says are different, and that is what it is. I'll let you know, nursing protocol varies by hospital. How can it be absolutely correct in this hospital and absolutely correct in that hospital, but they're both different? That's the way it is, I guess. That's just, it's not great comfort, but just an observation.
Yeah, and as we ask around, the idea would be we find someone who has done the same process as Richmond will go through, and we can say, can you help us shepherd, can you help shepherd us through this because it's complicated, so.
Ian?
I could, I'll just to help Daniel maybe explain the situation from point of view of myself as co-chair. I'd like to make 2 or 3 points. One is that before I was a member of the committee, I was carefully observing what was happening because I had a strong interest in the forest, and that's why eventually I applied to be a member. But I know at that time there were a number of situations where the select board had to inform the Andrews Committee about correct procedures. Now that that's obviously unfortunate. That shouldn't. You've got better things to be doing than monitoring what the committee is doing or should be doing or should not be doing. But let me just say that I think those have been really good learning experiences. And since I have been a member of the committee, there's been some really good interactions with town officials and other committees. We've interacted with the Conservation Commission, the Trails Committee. We've had help from Josh Allison. We have help frequently at a technical level from Duncan Wardwell. And we've met with Tyler Machia and with Keith Oborn. So a lot of very, very helpful interactions with people at many levels of town governance. And so I really feel that the committee is in a good position now. We have good communications, we have good understanding and knowledge of how things should be done. And I just would like to say, I think we are in a good place, and we definitely appreciate the interest of the select board, but it would be good to keep that interest at a positive level rather than you having to point out how we should be doing things. And I hope in future that we can be focusing on the positive interactions with the select board. Thanks.
Ian, thank you very much. And Daniel, thank you. Or not to rush you out of here, but Wright has a question.
I just was gonna make a comment that the forest itself and the committee is it's regulated by a whole bunch of different groups. So the Public Service Board regulates all of the activities related to the power lines that are there and the road system. We on the committee don't regulate that, and the select board doesn't regulate. When we're logging, it's the Department of Forest and Parks regulates it. And there's a farm road that we use and Maple Wind uses, and that's regulated, I think, by the Department of Agriculture. So we on the committee, we have a lot of bosses, and we want to be mindful of all of them and get good advice from you folks.
Okay. Well, as David said, it is, or Jeff, one of them said it's 10 o'clock. But I really appreciate your willingness to come and talk to us about this. And I'm really psyched about, now that the committee is almost at full strength, seeing where we can go with this.
Yeah, well, thank you all for your time. Appreciate you.
And have a good night.
Until next time.
Until
Thanks
next
for
time.
sticking it out until.
Yeah, thanks.
I fell asleep for a good hour and a half, so yeah.
At least there was something drawn on your face that happened to me one time. Okay, we have to close out the meeting. We have some stuff relating to essentially the town meeting. Item K on the agenda is consideration of approval of necessity resolution, declaration of official intent, warning, and ballot item. So there are 4 documents. And I'm going to shut up because I haven't given Josh hardly any chance to talk tonight. So Josh, can you tell us about item K?
Sure. So as you noted, this is for the funding of the town center renovation project, and this is the necessary paperwork to put it onto the town meeting ballot. The board at the last meeting did make a motion to move forward with a note rather than a bond, but our attorney seems to have drafted the language so that it could be either. So the town votes on it, and then after that, the board can look at interest rates, what's the best choice at that point, which I think is helpful to have those options. I don't know, Jeff, do you have any more to add, or if there's any other questions about the paperwork?
The only thing that I would add is that, all we're talking about is borrowing money. What the vehicle is.
Nothing like that. Nothing.
What the vehicle is, I would recommend that we keep our options open. Ian Bender sent, he's been very interested in this issue, and he sent us emails about, the advisability of waiting to borrow money until later in the year because interest rates could come down. I think that's a reasonable thing to think about. And we won't spend a lot of money soon. The first step will be doing design. We have to do final design and then before it can go out to bid. It seems to me whatever gives the board the most flexibility is the best option. And frankly, it's hard for me to imagine that most of the public is going to get into the nuts and bolts of, should we do it this way or should we do it that way? There are pluses and minuses to all of these different options. It seems to me the wisest course of action is to keep our options open.
That's an interesting point, Jeff. I mean, the bond pursuit, it requires that we ask for the full amount of money to be approved by the voters. And does that lock us into having to go out and fund that amount? Okay, so we can take
to that amount.
up to, right. So we can take that in pieces. If we see the next 6 months, we need $1 million.
I don't know if we can take it in pieces, but if we get our bid on final design and then we go up for construction and we realize that final design and construction is only $8 million, then we only borrow 8. We don't borrow the full 9.6, whatever it is.
And it might be minus like grants.
Exactly.
Bard?
I appreciate and applaud the idea of trying to keep flexibility, and it's the up to, that was my point, that may be defrayed or parsed out. We're really looking at this, but the challenge I think we have is explaining to the public how much it will cost. So we have to have some pro formas in place to say, we got to pick a vehicle and what the percentage, or interest rate would be, at least as a straw man financial model. What would it cost the average taxpayer per, assessed value? Because I think we should both be nimble or keep our options open, but we're going to have to, in my opinion, be specific when we talk about financial impact on taxpayers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we do have those samples from the last meeting when we looked at, I think, 2 bond options and a note option. And even those, as we just talked about, even if we settled on a 20-year note right now, the actual payback is going to change based on how much we borrow and interest rates at that time. So, but I think you're right. We can have a few samples that we can discuss with people at the upcoming meetings in January that we're going to have.
Yep. So the motion for this item on the agenda is to officially adopt, like I said, 4 different documents, which are in the packet. The declaration of intent, the resolution of necessity, the form of the warning, and the official ballot. And I know that, well, we have very few people from the public on the call right now, but if there's any member of the public who particularly wants to read these 4 bits of legalese, they are in the meeting archive, or if you can't find them, please let us know. But I'm just going to super briefly discuss what they are so that we're at least slightly transparent. So pardon me for just a moment while I share. Okay, so the declaration of intent is here. Declaration of official intent of the town of Richmond to reimburse certain expenditures from proceeds of indebtedness. And it consists of a series of whereases about what we're doing, that we intend to pay for those capital expenditures, that we expect them to be paid for by debt obligations in an amount not to exceed 9.8 million. And that we have intent to pay these back. Therefore, the issuer, are determining these recitals are true and correct, that we are doing these to comply with the requirements of section 1.150-2 of the Treasury regulations, that we will use these proceeds with a certain time frame, and that they will not be used as private activity bonds within the meaning of the Internal Revenue Code, et cetera, et cetera. This is stuff that we simply have to, before issuing a bond or note, we have to legally approve and sign. You want to add anything to that?
Well, it's so you can it's so you can actually spend money up to $500,000 in advance and then reimburse yourself
Correct.
for those expenses. So this isn't the next one you're going to look at, the necessity for capital construction projects really justifies the need for the bond. This allows a town to spend some money in advance of securing the bond and then pay themselves back with that money.
Right.
Where would that money come from?
That could be, I think, like a bond anticipation note, a short-term loan, unassigned funds, and then we would say, okay, we spent that much money at final design. Now we're gonna get the full loan, the construction cost. We can pay ourselves back for final design and put that back into the long-term bond.
Right, and
That's
as far
my
as
understanding of how that-
the legalistics of the bond, let's say the note passes. They have the voters have 30 days after town meeting to petition for reconsideration.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. So, is that is the case? So like, they could, they could petition and do a revote.
And there's a cap on how much we can spend prior to that 30-day period elapsing.
So we can spend money though. We can spend this $500,000 within that 30 day.
That's what.
I don't think we would, but
No, the lawyer said, doing so more simply, spending those money before the 30-day petition expires, he says it puts the town at risk, because you could spend some, but if it's repetitioned, revoted, and it goes down, if we just spent $50,000 on design, there's no bond to cover that.
Right, it's not, you can legally do it if we approve this, but it's not a good plan. Really, you gotta wait. The smart thing to do would be wait for the 30 days to be out. Okay, so that's the resolution necessity. Why do we need to do this? Then we have the actual article. This is not the entire town meeting ballot, because there's other things that are going to be on it, but this is the verbiage of the request to the voters. And then last but not least, if my computer will stop ignoring me. And that's the official ballot. And then finally, this is the warning. Not the entire warning, but the warning to put this article before the voters. There'll be other items on the full warning too, but this is the part of the warning that applies to this note.
Yep.
Okay, so it's as you saw in the declaration of intent, and the resolution of necessity, we are doing this because the law says we have to, and to, have the legal framework for going forward. So unless anybody particularly wants to modify the wording, what we need now is a move to adopt these 4 documents.
So moved.
Okay, so we have a motion. I will read the entire motion. It's been made by David Sanders, seconded by Lisa Miller. The motion is to adopt the declaration of intent, the resolution of necessity, the form of warning, and the official ballot for a vote at town meeting day regarding the funding of the town center renovation project.
David moved that. I'll second it.
I think we started second.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have motion of David Sanders, seconded by Lisa Miller. Seeing no further discussion, please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, aye.
Jeff, aye. David, aye.
Bard, aye.
And Jay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is consideration of approving a very slightly amended fiscal year 25 budget to be considered for approval by the voters at town meeting. Josh?
Yeah, I'll pull up. a second. So as I was going through finalizing the wording for the charitable donations for social services, I noticed that in there, and let me just go down to where those were here. So those were in donation social services. So these will be in the next agenda item. Yeah, I'm not sharing. Thanks. I'm sitting here,
Projector's working.
as if you can see everything. Okay, so in the budget, we have donation for social services. In the next agenda item, we'll talk about how each one of these needs its own individual line item to be voted on at town meeting. So as I was going through creating those articles, I noticed that we had put the community well-being line in here, and that's not really a specific request from a specific organization. And we had, because that's money that essentially has been in the budget for the last, I think, 2 years. This will be the third year that the board has put in there and been approved by the voters to be spent by the select board on projects that sort of come up through the year that relate to social services. And it's been actually more recently put on like substance abuse prevention work that's been done. So what I suggest is we put that back up into admin for the $5,000 because I don't have a requesting agency. And we had already in the revenue side done an offset of $5,000 to come from the opioid settlement, which was down here, I think.
No.
So we already had that offset. What that's going to do though is it then changes the amount of unassigned funds that we have to use because the expense side goes up. It sort of slightly moves this down to 433,186. And then the only other, so we put that 433,186 there. And then that just takes our tax increase. I think we were at like 4.96 after the last meeting, which I know Lisa really liked. This puts us at 5.1. But I just don't see a real good way to put that community line into a separate ballot item on the town meeting. So that's.
Because it's not specific, it's just as things come up.
It's not a specific request is where I kind of came up against.
Unless we do significantly raise the amount of money for dog licenses.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how many more dogs we're getting in 2024.
Okay, so, I understand the reason. I don't have any objection to this. There's a very simple motion if somebody wants to make it. But does anybody have any other discussion or comments about this?
Well, I think we'll see when it comes to pass if the percent that we present is gonna be influential. Just my thought.
Okay, does anybody wish to make the motion?
Sure. Let's see. I move to approve the FY25 budget as amended from the December 18th, 2023 select board meeting to be considered for approval by the voters at town meeting.
This is David, I'll second.
Yeah, we have a motion from Jeff Ford, seconded by David Sander to move to approve the FY25 budget as amended from the December 18th, 2023 select board meeting to be considered for approval by the voters at town meeting. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, no?
Jeff, aye.
David, aye.
Bard, aye.
Jay, aye. The motion passes 4-1. Okay. Now, the next one is the one no one particularly likes, but legally, I think we kind of have to do this. For those of you watching at home, we're about to discuss the manner in which we get approval for what are, in a sense, charitable expenditures. In previous years, we have had a form for charitable organizations to request funds. And most organizations have had their request approved. However, it was determined by checking various sources, our attorney, the VLCT and others, that there actually is some question about whether that was entirely legal, and that it's more precise to say that we need to have a legitimate governmental purpose for any of these expenditures to other organizations. You know, like, for example, if you say we're going to give $1,000 to the ABC group of Schenectady, New York, you have to be able to say what exact governmental service that committee is going to be fulfilling by getting this amount of money. And we spent some time during the budget discussion process discussing which items should go under which portions of the budget. But at the end of the day, what we worked out was going to be necessary were individual articles on the town meeting ballot, essentially saying, shall the voters of Richmond vote to approve X amount to name of requesting organization for this specific service to town residents, such amount being reasonably necessary for the support thereof. This means that instead of having one overall budget article, there's going to be an overall budget article, but then there will be individual items for each organization, such as the ones that Josh is showing up there on the screen. An article for shall we give X amount of money to Vermont Family Network? Shall we give X amount of money to Age Well? And each one of these will come before the town meeting body and can be discussed and will have to be moved and voted on individually. And that's just, apparently legally, that's how it always should have been and how it needs to be. So if you look now up at the screen, you'll notice that the warning, the town meeting warning as Article 1 to elect officers, Article 2 to hear reports, Article 3 to approve a budget. And then starting at Article 4 and going all the way down to what, Article 14, each one of these is shall the voters approve X amount of money to this charity or this outside organization to provide this service. So for example, HopeWorks, Article 11. HopeWorks is an organization which I support that provides help to survivors of sexual violence. So the article reads, shall the voters of Richmond vote to appropriate $1,885 to HopeWorks for their work to end all forms of sexual violence to town residents, such amount being reasonably necessary for the support thereof. That's an example. And then after that, we go down to Article 12, which is the town center vote.
So other articles.
Other articles below that are not specific to charitable organizations.
Well, yeah, we've got conservation.
We do have the conservation fund, and then Article 14 is the
Anything else?
anything else.
But yeah, so it's really, it's these, it's 8 total, 7 to 11.
Right. So the
More than that. Yeah,
Go ahead.
and each one of these, what made this a little tricky to write was not only did you have to put the amount requested, the name of the organization, but some sort of like brief description. Yeah, so I've spent time going through the request to try to find and then word it in a way that was like relevant to Richmond. So open to feedback. If anybody sees something that looks funny, I also sent it to our attorney who gave us this guidance to say, Joe, what do you think? So we can get this approved to the next meeting. Linda's still got time if we get this approved in 2 weeks to get it into the town meeting, but to get it warned on the booklet. So I did want, any feedback, because Lord knows I make typos.
10:30 at night.
Well,
It's great.
for the next 2 weeks too, if you have questions or anything. Go ahead, Lisa.
So these are still pieces of the budget, the total budget number that was. put up there, correct?
No, so,
Taken out.
yeah, so I took, so we have nothing here for these, and I'll explain that when we get to the vote at town meeting.
It's like an a la carte menu, kind of.
Exactly.
It is, but the voters will have the right to change the amount,
Yep.
increase the amount, reduce the amount.
Okay, thank you. Well, it takes some of the.
I think it's more democratic, to be honest, because somebody might say, why are we only giving X amount of money? And
Yeah.
there will also be the comment that I know will be made, it's too,
Mhm.
that people will say, why are we doing this? Why can't we just encourage town voters to donate directly from their own wallets? And that's a valid point too.
If the number winds up being 0, then they will. They'll have to.
Yeah.
And that's the conversation. I mean, that's the point of having town meeting and talking about it, right?
You get voted down.
The fact that I already donate to a lot of these has no bearing on whether I should make all the town voters donate. That's
Mhm.
just because we all like them doesn't mean everybody in town does.
Well, I'll be curious how it goes down and whether people feel that this is the right way to go about doing it. I mean, is this the right menu of organizations that, you know, we want to propose to spend
Right.
tax
And-
money on?
Somebody could, I believe, move from the floor under the last article. I move to donate $500 to Bass Fishing
I don't know,
USA.
last article's not binding, but you could do it within the budget.
Well, okay, you could do it within the budget. Somebody could propose other organizations. In
I
fact,
don't
they
know if you
probably
could do-
will.
Yeah, I don't know if you.
I have to think about how that could actually be warned correctly. I almost feel like, I think they have to be on the ballot. I'll check with Joe though.
That's the
You
warning.
can amend the budget.
You could amend the budget, but could you amend the budget to add in a social service, which has to be voted on separately?
No, we.
I don't think so.
Our community care is like $20,000.
Could somebody,
Well,
okay,
but that was before, that now our community cares has its own, that own budget. I can verify that.
yeah, because it's gonna come up.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna say, well, why can't we amend Article 7 to say $1,000 to COTS and $500 to this organization?
Mm.
Somebody's gonna try that.
So these are all based on requests.
Right.
For
Correct.
specific amounts. So these weren't numbers that we made up.
Oh, I know.
I'm just stating it for.
Oh, well, yeah, for the people watching at home, right?
Mhm.
Somebody might go, why are we only giving $375 to the Center for Independent Living? The answer being, that's what they asked for.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I, just for the record, I still feel our community cares is different because it does provide a very direct.
I agree.
Service to, you know, tangible service to, Richmond residents. The other ones are, they're not that they're not worthy organizations, and it's not that it's likely that Richmond, you know, residents do use these other services, but it's much further out. Our
I will
community care-
say, Jeff, most of these organizations can tell you how many people they serve in the town of Richmond.
Mm.
And, you know, they should be prepared to do that, or we should be prepared to answer that
We
question.
can get
Yeah, we've got all the applications and I think it
it's
asked.
on a lot of the
It's
applications.
on a lot of the
Yeah,
applications.
so we should probably have that.
Yeah, we'll have a printout of those at the meeting, absolutely.
Okay, well, I love you all passionately, but I want to be here all night.
So we'll vote on this next meeting.
Yep. We have one item left. It's the monthly update from planning and zoning. Then, of course, we have minutes, warrants, and purchase orders.
Looks great.
This planning and zoning committee, planning and zoning staff, Keith Oborn and Tyler Mesha have been busy. They have attended meetings of the planning commission. The development review board, the transportation committee and so forth, the housing committee, CCRPC. Rather than attempt to read all this, is there anything in particular that either Tyler or Keith wanted you to call out?
I don't think so. It's available in the packet if anybody wants to read through it. But yeah, like you said, they've been very busy with many committees. I think there's a zoning amendment coming to the select board shortly out of the planning commission. So that's getting some movement.
I'd like to just say, I'm impressed at how much they got done.
Yeah.
In fact, our whole staff, including you, it's an incredible amount done. And it's, it keeps happening.
Keeps on moving.
Okay, let's move on to approval of minutes, warrants, and purchase orders. Now in that order, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of December 18th?
So I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion from David Sanders, seconded by Lisa Miller to approve the minutes of December 18th. Are there any corrections, additions, deletions, or other changes? Seeing none, please state your name and your vote.
Oh, sorry.
Lisa, aye.
Jeff, I. David, I.
Hard eye.
Jay, aye. Okay, moving on to warrants. And purchase orders. We don't have a purchase orders. Yay, that makes life easy.
A little bit more, yeah.
I thought there was one.
Nothing that needed to be signed or
Oh, okay.
approved. No, I mean, we put them into the invoices, so you see the backup,
Right, yeah.
but those were
That's
also
what you signed if they're within your authority.
either that or they were ones you signed earlier.
We have a motion from David Sanders to approve the warrants. Do I have a second?
Yep.
Second.
Second by Lisa Miller. Are there any questions about the warrants? Okay, we have a motion from David Sanders, second by Lisa Miller to approve the warrants. Please state your name and your vote.
Lisa, aye.
Jeff, I.
David, aye.
Hard eye.
And Jay, aye. Okay. Suggestions for next meeting's agenda.
We talked about a flood damage, update on the fields. We talked about an update on the NARCAN protocol.
Yeah, that's definitely, we should definitely get that. Aaron?
Hey, I was just thinking about how confusing that was about the vote, about how you can have so much money for our community cares camp but then also people from the floor can change it. And I'm wondering if might be worth discussing, putting together a little MMCTV PSA about that for just people to sort of kind of comprehend. Anyway, just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Speaking as the board, president of the board, I think that's a great idea. Anything we can do to avoid confusion?
Yeah.
Jeff,
Have people get info ahead of time.
Jeff, you've already filmed some stuff with MCTV regarding the town center note, right?
Yeah, we've got a video.
Yeah.
You know, we got a walk around video of it.
Okay, anything else that people want to add at this time to the agenda?
When do we, does, Kansas Community Forest need to get back to you, Jay, or Josh? About
I think they'll circle back. I think.
Okay. Seems to be the sooner the better, because they're almost fully staffed now, so they're gonna wanna start into the spring with some things.
Yeah, it sounded like they were gonna meet and discuss goals for 2024 and then maybe circle back at that point. So,
Okay, so I'm sure Josh has some stuff for us to sign, but
yeah.
otherwise, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Okay.
So moved.
Okay, motion from David Fender, seconded by Lisa Miller to adjourn. Please state your name and your vote.
So
Hi, Jeff. Hi. David, nay.
Say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned.
Day.